Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show, and I'm glad that you guys can join me on this episode. Can you guys hear me okay? I'm testing out a new microphone. So, I'm still dice about it. I have my other one in the background just in case I need to switch out, but I'm hoping this one works. I'm being told that a listener of the show passed away. I'm sorry to hear that. Dwayne Vogel, who came to your show, passed away. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I am very sorry to hear that. Yeah, that sucks. Death is kind of just built into the process, right? There's no way around it. But we have a power show for you today. Brian Berletic, he just popped in. Mark Sleboda is going to be here at 8:15. So we have a damn good show for you today. Now this clears your previous microphone. Okay. Damn, that sucks. I'll have to switch that out. But hopefully we can bear it for this as we bring in our guests. We are joined by the man himself, the one and only Brian Berletic. Brian Berletic, he is, if I can get to my calendar, there we are. Brian Berletic is Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas, a fantastic show. Brian, I have sung your praises for a while, even before I knew I was singing your praises, before I knew who you were. How you doing, man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well. I'm glad that I'm here on time this time, and I look forward to our discussion.
You're fine. You're fine. No, man, I'm glad that you could join me. It's funny. After the first few times, I've had difficulty figuring out angles to take in our conversation because you tend to be pretty concise in your point of view in regards to, look, this stuff is in the documents. This is exactly what they're doing, whether it takes 3 years, whether it takes 10 years, this is exactly what they're doing. And I think you're right. It seems to be the maneuvers that the U.S. is doing. Overextend Russia, which is precisely what they're doing. Try to create choke points with China. It's what they're trying to do. But I think I want to hit two stories with you. One is to take this from the opposite angle. If you're Russia, China, Iran, Brazil, etc., what are they doing? Because they're clearly making moves. You can kind of see it in the way that they're operating. China cutting back on the minerals, opening up trade routes overland with its allies. You can see the boisterousness that's coming out from the standpoint of India saying, look, we're going to buy Russian oil. You're not going to tell us what to do in regards to our sovereignty. And the other story I want to hit is something that you were hitting pretty hard on, especially with you being in Thailand, is the Thailand-Cambodia thing. I am fascinated by that because I was confused by it. I wasn't sure whether it was entirely an issue of agency. But then when you get Cambodia coming out saying stuff like, we're going to nominate a sociopath for the Nobel Peace Prize, you think to yourself, what the hell? What the hell is this? Let's start with the first one first. The moves that Russia, China, India, that these countries are effectively making to try to get around this issue of primacy. What is your take on that, but then as a way of stepping into this conversation?
Yeah, so I always defer to the U.S. policy papers, which are published by think tanks funded by the largest, most powerful corporate financier interests in the collective West. And those are the interests that drive U.S. foreign policy, not President Trump, not President Biden, not the people in their cabinets. These people are a layer, an interface between the public and these special interests. The think tanks are a way of disseminating this policy, and then Washington is there to sell it more or less to the public, and in some cases implement it. Russia and China and many other nations are either already long aware of all of this, or they're becoming increasingly aware of this. And as you say, they're reacting to it. They're not just sitting there while this is happening to them. They are actively creating their own strategy, to deal with this. And the strategy is the creation and the rise of multipolarism. They see how the United States has a lot of nations have no real fundamental issue with the dollar being the reserve currency, for example, but because the United States has weaponized it, because they have abused this power that they have consolidated in their own hands, they've left people no choice but to seek an alternative, simply because if they don't, they will be subject to U.S. interests and desires, not just in general, but even within their very own borders. And you wanted to talk about Thailand and Cambodia, and when I get into the details, a lot of details people didn't know about or overlooked. Your economic dependence on the United States completely undermines your sovereignty and your ability to pursue your own best interests. What ends up happening is you end up serving Washington's interests at the expense of your own country and your own people, and only a very small handful of people in the country, but the elite that are working with or for the United States, they benefit. They can leave anytime that they want, and then you have millions of people stuck there facing the consequences. Ukraine is a perfect example of this in practice, in real time.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Economic security is effectively political security on some level, and I think Europe is finding that out the hard way. Let's go with China for the moment for the choke points. So China seems to be expanding their capabilities over land. So the Iranian rail thing is one really good example of that. They also seem to be cutting the number of rare earth minerals, quote unquote. They're not necessarily rare, but China owns kind of a monopoly on the distribution of those rare earth minerals. And there's been articles coming out of the Wall Street Journal and a few other outlets pointing out that China has been cutting back on those, which there's estimations, or at the very least rumors, that it directly affected the US ability to supply weapon systems, either to Israel or, for that matter, to Ukraine. Give me a take on that. I mean, because that at the very least gets across that China is aware of what is taking place, responding to what is taking place in a way that's very Chinese. And I don't mean that poorly. I mean that in the sense of China is very slow to react. They don't tend to like to get involved in military conflicts. And they tend to like to exert almost in a go type versus a chess type way of operation. Or do you agree with that?
Yes. I think in general, I agree with that. So we began by talking about multipolarism in general, and then there's many projects within that where, people have been talking about BRICS for many, many years. And those of us that remember the inception of BRICS and seeing how far it has come, I mean, that is a testament to the willpower behind this from nations like Russia, China, also India, Brazil, the founding members of BRICS, essentially. And so, yes, China is also looking at the things targeting them specifically rather than multipolarism in general. And yes, the United States has this strategy. It's an open strategy. They openly declare they want to encircle and contain China, counter China, they have deter China. These are the many different euphemisms that they use to describe this. And they are the U.S. military and the Navy and the U.S. Marine Corps in particular have been arrayed specifically to contain China through maritime shipping, naval vessels, and also civilian shipping. They're putting the pieces in place to cut that off in a time of conflict that the U.S. itself will provoke. And we see them provoking it in the South China Sea, the island province of Taiwan, which is part of China, recognized as part of China even by the U.S. State Department officially, but in practice, they're in there agitating. And so you mentioned the Belt and Road Initiative. This is another project that has been around for years and years. That there was a lot of talk about it in the beginning. A lot of pieces are falling into place now. And that's the reason they are building this, to diversify away from these maritime choke points. The U.S., for many years, in many policy papers spanning the entire 21st century and even before that, where they just openly talked about shutting the Strait of Malacca. The U.S. Navy is in the South China Sea. They say they're for freedom of navigation, but all of the navigation taking place there is Chinese maritime shipping going to and from their largest trade partners, which are all of these nations in the region, including the nations the U.S. pretends it's there to help with these so-called maritime disputes, which are real disputes that these nations have with China, but that they also have with one another. They get very heated, but overall bilateral relations and regional relations are very warm and constructive. People forget that not that long ago, a couple of years ago, France and the UK had some tiff over fishing waters, and they both mobilized their navy, but there was no remote possibility that was ever going to go beyond posturing and political wrangling before it was settled bilaterally, and all of their other relations together as co-vassals of the United States just continued moving uninterrupted. So you're absolutely right. The Belt and Road Initiative is one of these ways China is reacting. Their massive industrial base, they understand that real power comes from being able to actually shape and move the physical world. So their industrial power, their ability to build huge infrastructure projects the U.S. couldn't even pretend to even dream of doing now. They could have before, but now there's no possible way. That is the other key that they're pursuing to try to balance this against U.S. containment strategy. And again, containment strategy, you have to think about it. The U.S. is coming across the entire Pacific Ocean, putting forces, U.S. forces, tens of thousands of U.S. troops, missiles, aircraft, ships, closer to Chinese shores than to America's own shores. Think about that, and think about if it was reversed, how Americans would feel about that. And that, this for some reason, Americans just can't seem to understand that. They feel like they're entitled to do this to others, and no one has any right to even think about doing it to them. And if you listen to the rhetoric, whether it's the Biden administration or the Trump administration, China just reacting to this containment, to tens of thousands of U.S. troops right off their shores, just them reacting to it defensively is unacceptable, is somehow some sort of provocation by China, aggression by China somehow. So this is the game that's being played, and these are just some of the ways China is reacting. I always bring this up every time we talk about this. Yes, China has a physical Belt and Road Initiative. They have the digital Silk Road, where Huawei and other companies were building out physical telecom networks to diversify away from Western-controlled telecom technology. Just think about it. Not only do we know the NSA uses Western telecom to spy on everybody, they can control it. And as we saw with the pager attack in Lebanon, they can physically, literally weaponize it, turn it into bombs, and kill people with it. And so the digital Silk Road was part of that. But I always say they need to go one step further. China domestically has social media platforms that they have created themselves, that they control. Silicon Valley cannot determine how information flows between the people of China within their own borders. That is a decision the Chinese people and their government get to make. They need to expand that beyond the borders of China. Russia does the same thing. They need to expand this beyond. They sell weapons to secure the physical domains of national security for their partners and allies, but they really haven't offered any protection to these nations' information space, which is now in the 21st century a national security domain. So this is something that I think they could do more. If they did more, this would be one of the areas.
This is a fascinating conversation. I had this conversation with Arno, and I was asking him, it started off going with this notion of how did Russia lose Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, etc. And it went into this thing of like, yeah, Russia doesn't believe we build weapons. We don't do information warfare. And I was like, why don't you do information warfare? like you're a nation state. Like as a nation state, like you may put out RT and Sputnik, but oftentimes when you're thinking about the United States, they're using subversive information warfare. Like they are using like NGOs and all of these other things in order to, in this kind of non-transparent ways of getting across a particular point of view, political point of view, to put pressure and those type of things. He was like, we don't believe in doing that. I was like, that is to your detriment. That's to your detriment. I agree with you.
Yeah. No, and the answer isn't for Russia to match U.S. interference with Russian interference, or China to engage in Chinese interference around the globe. That would only be playing into this narrative that the U.S. has already set up. But what you do is you give nations the ability to secure and protect their information space, and you do that by offering cooperation with. Hey, Thailand, your whole information space is utterly dominated by Silicon Valley. And we're not even going to give you TikTok and have you locked into Chinese-controlled information space. We will help you develop your own, just like we're helping you build this high-speed rail network that will connect to China. We will help you build local, Thai-controlled social media platforms that displace Facebook and Google and X and all of these invasive, weaponized information tools that the U.S. does literally use to brainwash, indoctrinate targeted populations, and turn them against their own best interests. And again, you mentioned Georgia, Armenia, and it's Azerbaijan, but there's also Ukraine, which is right now in front of the entire world committing national suicide because the U.S. captured their political system, their information space, and now they've convinced the Ukrainian people that fighting for U.S. hegemony and fighting for NATO encroachment on Russia is somehow in their own best interest, even as they watch the country crumble and burn to the ground around them. And so giving nations the ability to protect their information space from U.S. interference and subversion and political capture, that is something that Russia and China could, and I think absolutely must do, or they're going to lose. And we can talk about the Thai-Cambodia border conflict and then the subsequent trade deal that was made with the United States, and we could talk about how dangerous this is and how this short circuits China's apparent plan to win these countries over.
Well, one last thing before we get to that, Russia and Ukraine. This plan to overextend Russia, do you think this is working in practice? Or do you think, obviously they're in the war with Ukraine, and obviously they lost this information war thing that was taking place. And to be fair, Russia was kind of putting itself together back after the Yeltsin years, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the US was able to take advantage in a sense. So I'm not going to be too boisterous on that point. But is that plan working from your point of view? I know the war is going well for Russia, but this is beyond one individual war. We're talking about this kind of, I don't want to call it global hegemony, because that's not necessarily what Russia is going for. That's what the US is going for. But how do you see that playing out in practice?
It has at least been partially successful, because we remember before the conflict in Ukraine really got going, and especially with the Russian military operation inside Ukraine, where was Russia involved elsewhere? In Syria. And they were protecting and upholding the sovereign government of the Syrian nation state. They at least froze U.S. regime change and proxy war operations inside and against Syria. But then because they got wrapped up in this conflict, which again, the RAND Corporation, 2019, there's a paper literally titled Extending Russia. And among the many options in there was arming Ukraine and drawing Russia into a conflict in Ukraine, and also arming the terrorists, which they call rebels, in Syria. And so they did this, and they overextended Russia to the point where they could not do both. They had to pick. They picked Ukraine, and Syria was dismembered as a nation state, and it exists as a failed state, and also as now a springboard for U.S. military operations elsewhere in the region. They use that as an air corridor to attack Iran directly. They're building up this terrorist force that they delisted as a terrorist organization. Now they're going to openly back it, arm it, train it, and then they're going to use it against what is left of Syria, its neighbors along its borders, including Iraq and Iran.
Okay, that's fair. I guess. See, the Syria thing is complicated to me because everybody has a different assessment on why Syria fell. Like, you would have people saying, well, Iran didn't give them the support that they needed. Russia didn't give them the support that they needed. Syria was eaten alive from the inside, in which case forces pulled back. I don't know if it was entirely just where Russia didn't have the capability of helping. I think Russia will probably say, well, they didn't want to fight that war. The soldiers melted away. And did they expect us to fight it on our own? Give me a take on that point of view, or you don't accept that point of view.
Yeah, I really don't. If you were following the fighting as it was happening, there was extremely intense fighting in the very beginning, and the Syrian forces were just overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed with drones and all kinds of other tactics and weapons that the U.S. has been perfecting on the battlefield in Ukraine, and then they just brought it over, and they built up these forces. And because not just Russia, but also Iran were distracted, the U.S. is using the exact same strategy against Iran and also China, tying them down with these dilemmas right along their periphery that prevent them from being everywhere at one time. And it has at least partially worked. And I mean, let's be honest, that Russia went into Syria. That was a huge risk. It was a huge investment. They spent years there. They spent Russian blood and treasure there. And if they could have preserved the Syrian government, they would have, but they couldn't. And part of the Syrian army being eaten from the inside out was Russia and Iran not having the resources to compensate for that and to reverse that process or to freeze it. And they're not all powerful. They don't have infinite resources, and they were not able to do it. So I think the policy paper laid all of this out, and that is exactly how it has unfolded. Now, they hope that they can overextend Russia to the point where there's some sort of internal collapse. I don't think that we see signs of that happening. And I think what Russia has done is they've picked and chose where they're going to really stand firm and where they will divest. Belarus is an example. That was also in the paper. They wanted to do regime change in Belarus. That doesn't look like it's going to happen. Russia is putting nuclear weapons, Oreshnik, non-nuclear strategic weapons in Belarus. They've transferred Iskander missiles, which are very, very powerful, tactical, I would also say, in a way, strategic weapons. So they've reinforced certain areas and they've cut their losses elsewhere. I think we're going to see, Iran had no choice. They have done this, and China, to a degree, is going to be forced to do this as well.
What happens when Kiev falls?
Well,
I'm fascinated by the question. God, man, I'm fascinated by that question. Because, like, from my point of view, Donald Trump, Medvedev pointed out to Donald Trump, he says, look, your ultimatums, we don't care for all intents and purposes. And those ultimatums are going to lead you to the brink of war, not with Russia and Ukraine, but with Russia and the United States. Now, that's not a threat. He's pointing out something that Donald Trump doesn't seem to quite get. Every ultimatum you give is an ultimatum that you're effectively stuck with, that they are going to ignore. They're telling you flat out, we are going to ignore your ultimatums. We're going to cross these. And at some point, you either take your ball and go home, call it a day, call it a loss, or you continue to escalate, which is the Joe Biden path. You can do that, but you're effectively going to end up at a point where it will become kinetic, because it has become kinetic if you're never going to accept the loss. Does it get to that point from your point of view? Because I know you said that they from Europe, but Medvedev is saying the U.S. directly.
Yes. So yes, we've talked about this many times before. Ukraine is the first proxy being fed into this proxy war and destroyed by it. And the United States is openly preparing Europe to be next, and they're creating coalitions of the willing. They're separating them out from NATO and Article 5 and any perceived obligation that the U.S. would have to come to their rescue. So essentially, they're creating the next Ukraine to be fed into the proxy war in Ukraine. They've got the Baltic nations lined up. Completely expendable. I don't know what these people are thinking. I don't know what the people in these Baltic nations are thinking. They are, to the United States, they're as good as gone. They're completely expendable. The U.S. has no interest, not in any of these countries. And as a matter of fact, if you read the Rand Corporation paper from 2019, they admit that if they're successful in provoking Russia into a larger commitment to Ukraine, it will be the end of Ukraine. It will destroy Ukraine. It'll create mass casualties, refugee flows, territorial losses that cannot be reversed, and a very, very poor terms, if there even are terms of any sort of political settlement. So they admit this. And this is their vision for all of their proxies, including all of Europe, all of their proxies in the Middle East, if necessary, and of course, all of their proxies in the Asia Pacific in a very similar conflict that they are already fighting with China.
I think your point of view, though, just to be clear, they don't back down. They continue to escalate up until the point where it is a direct conflict, where it may not be NATO proper, because they don't want NATO to get involved. It's coalitions of the willing, where they can say, well, this is not really NATO. This is just Europe. Because I guess my point is, if it's NATO, you're immediately bringing in the United States into the conflict, and the United States doesn't necessarily want to get into a direct conflict. They prefer to feed in Europe. And so they pick, all right, who's willing to go in that doesn't include Article 5? That is a tough, I have to see that in practice. Because I get the sense, like, I have a hard time believing that Europe gets involved, but the United States doesn't get involved.
I think that's what their plan is. I think they will pick other nations to feed in, and it'll just keep expanding out. And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to work out, how are we going to do this without it spiraling out of control? Because what we want is a slow burn that is going to wrap up Russia so that they can't aid Iran or China or any of the nations in between as we do our, they say strategic sequencing. We cannot take all of these nations on at the same time. So we're going to pick apart one at a time, and we need to keep everyone else distracted so they can't mobilize their resources and stop us when we're doing this in places like Syria, in the Caucasus region and elsewhere. And even in regards to Iran now, Iran's being attacked directly. That conflict's just paused. That is far from over, and the U.S. goal there is to dismember Iran in the same way they did Syria. And so, would Russia and China, people say, why aren't they doing more? Because they are tied up in these quagmires that the United States has created for both of them in their respective regions of the world.
Well, see, I don't think they want to do more because they don't want to end up in a world war. And from their
point of view,
right. But that's that is so unsatisfying. And the reason why I say it's unsatisfying is it's like the pragmatic people, the rational people have to be on some level show restraint because of the other lunatics. That is so unsatisfying, even though it's kind of true in regards to what's taking place. Like, Russia has done any and everything in its power to avoid a larger war with NATO. And that's not true on the other side. From their point of view, but this is just them being weak. Their pragmatism is weakness. It's not weakness, it's pragmatism. It's trying to avoid a larger war, or at the very least prepare for that larger war when that larger war comes. We'll see. I think it's going to be very hard for the U.S. to stay out of that conflict, just like it's been impossible for the U.S. to stay out of every other world war. And whatever president is in it is going to get sucked into it, just like every other U.S. president got sucked into it. I could be wrong. Meaning, regardless of what they said in those policy papers, reality is different. Or do you disagree with that? That all things being equal, no, the U.S. is going to stay out of it because the U.S. doesn't want to be involved in nuclear war. This is not World War II. This is not World War I. They're nukes now. In fact, to make that point clear, this came out about a week ago. I was going to hit this, and when you and Mark was coming on today, it reminded me. U.S. moves nuclear bombs to the UK. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? Give me your take on this article. And you haven't seen the article, but just the article, there's farcical elements of this because The Economist is coming out of the West. But of course, there's always the argument of, you're forcing us to do this. Now, Russia admits in the article, Russia's made no advances towards NATO. It's made no overtures at all. And yet, you could say, well, we need to defend ourselves. So the U.S. needs to move nukes into the theater, not to mention moving troops to the Polish border, from my understanding. Is this what you're looking at?
Well, what they're doing is kind of a mirror version of what Russia has done with Belarus. So Russia is positioning Belarus where it's essentially untouchable. You cannot attack Belarus without causing a massive escalation with Russia itself. And the United States is trying to deter Russia from saying, because we see what the West is doing. They're fighting Russia and they're laundering it through Ukraine. In other words, all of the intel, all of the battle plans, even the targets being picked, these are being picked by US generals and other generals across NATO, not by Ukraine. Ukraine is just the excuse. They're just the front, the face of this. But this is already the US is already involved. They have generals in Germany running the entire war from top to bottom, from the master plan all the way down to picking specific targets on the battlefield and hitting them with US weapons that the US has given Ukraine for Ukraine to, push the button, so if even, to go hit these targets.
Yeah.
And even before that, the US has openly, admittedly, taken over all of Ukraine's intelligence agencies. So when we hear about Ukrainian intelligence assassinating politicians, journalists, military officers in Moscow, that's the CIA doing that. So they're already involved and they're doing it through Ukraine. And they're worried that, Russia, maybe they're not going to attack the US, but maybe they'll flatten a factory in Germany or in the UK with Oreshnik missiles or something like that. And so this is why the US is posturing like this to try to deter that from happening. Of course, would the US use nuclear weapons if Russia used a non-nuclear strategic weapon on arms factories in either the UK or Germany? I don't know. This is what everyone is. They're doing this step by step, very slowly, incrementally. Each side is very slowly pushing towards where they want to be in this conflict and what they think they need to do to create sufficient leverage to achieve their objectives. For Russia, it's self-preservation. For the US, it's not self-preservation. It's not defending Europe. It is simply maintaining its hegemony, including its hegemony over Europe and the subjugation of Europe and the stripping away of Europe's sovereignty through this bureaucratic layer known as the European Union.
But they have to know, and we can move to Cambodia and Thailand after this. I guess my thing is though, but they have to know that at a certain point, you reach a precipice where there is no more maneuvering. Like if you and I are playing chess, we can maneuver for a while, but there's a crowded game board. There's only so many spaces you can go before it becomes kinetic. And if you engage in a kinetic war, in a sense, there is no winning that war. Like it's one thing if I have a distribution of force that I can win and I can force a win. There's no force that can win in this. There are nukes involved. Same thing with China. The US is going to lose any kind of conflict with China. It's just like I get it. It's almost like using the threat of annihilation of everything as a leverage and a maneuvering space, despite the fact that both sides have that threat of destroying everything. It's a very bizarre way of operating. But yeah, I think you're right. It's what they're doing. Yeah. This is not going to turn out well.
It already hasn't.
Yeah, but it can get dramatically worse. I mean, like when I said dramatically worse, I mean dramatically worse. Like it's like end of the world dramatically worse in the way that they're operating. Do you think the Europeans are going to be stupid enough to allow this? Because as you point out, these people are idiots. They're acting as if we're on the same team, missing the fact that the US doesn't have teams. We have vassals. I mean, they're given tribute. In regards to the trade deal, that should tell them something. Do you think the Europeans themselves, I think because the Russians are looking at it as Europe doesn't have a military, Europe doesn't have a manufacturing base. The United States doesn't quite get that if you're trying to do what you want to do in regards to the war, you have to let up on the reins on the financial sector. Meaning, how can I say this? It's like you want to be able to have your war and make a profit, but you can't do both. Either you allow Europe their own industrial base where they can build these weapons, outbuild their military, et cetera, in which case they may, at the very least, let's say, be a fatter meal for the Russians. But that's not what the U.S. wants. The U.S. wants Europe to continuously buy weapons from us, to be completely reliant upon us, regardless of all of the stuff about multipolarity and everything else. We want to make a buck and pursue our war plans. I don't think you can do both. But give me your take on this.
Well, this has been the collective West's fundamental problem. They want global hegemony, but they will not invest what is necessary to do this militarily. But as I warn people, you don't need to do it all militarily. And yes, the U.S. and Russia, they're maneuvering, and it is getting closer and closer to a direct confrontation. What the U.S. hopes that it can do somehow is sufficiently overextend, surround, contain Russia, and eventually undermine and topple the government, and then dismember the Russian Federation, like they say they did to the Soviet Union, and in many ways actually did do to the Soviet Union. This is what they think they can do, and so it's a replay of the Cold War, but it's just with in this modern context. And in a situation where it's not exactly the same, where Russian military industrial power and economic power is very different than the Soviet Union. And now you have China as a major factor, and again, a non-white nation that is surpassing all of the West, which is something that has not happened in centuries. And this is something these people running Western policy as racists, they cannot accept this. This is at the very core, and you could see them panicking, overwhelmed with anger and outrage. How dare the Chinese even think about surpassing us? And it's not as if they're surpassing the West at the expense of the West. They're offering to rise together with everybody, but the West just simply they cannot live in a world where they do not dominate absolutely everything on the planet, not just within their own borders, but within everybody else's borders. They see the entire planet as theirs to do as they please. And this has been the mindset for centuries, and unfortunately, it's something deeply rooted that will not change on its own. It's only going to change if the rest of the world makes it change. Leaves them no other option but to change that mindset.
Yeah.
So it's very troubling.
I've said it before, racist people don't see the world clearly, and that will be their downfall. That will be their downfall. Mark my words. It never fails. That is usually the thing that screws them over. Let's move to Thailand and Cambodia. Break this down for us. I've had people make the argument that this is purely an issue of agency, where this is to do with long-held grievances based on a temple that flared out of control. I've had people make the argument that one of these, either Thailand or Cambodia, was being pushed by the U.S. And by the way, I think the India thing on some level might have been pushed by the U.S. That nobody brings that up. It's like, who benefits from that? This is the cui bono type thing. You get India and Pakistan fighting a war, both of which are on the border of China, both of which work closely with China. And at the very least, one of those countries are close to BRICS. And you get a terrorist organization that murders a bunch of people. India immediately blames Pakistan, and they end up in a fight over this. And I kept saying to myself, but what is the benefit of Pakistan doing this? There is no answer. And when you ask India that, they would come up and say, well, yeah, because of hostages and because of previous terrorist things in Baluchistan. And it's like, that's a bit thin. And then you go to Pakistan and they're like, yeah, we think India faked it. It's like, okay, I don't buy that. So like, there's no good connector between those two things in regards to why something will do something like this, where it's known that the United States uses terrorist organizations, all sorts of things, the kill squads, South America, the terrorists or the Nazis that were taking place in Ukraine, the terrorists that they used to use in Pakistan in general, the terrorists in Syria. So it's not like, oh my God, I can't believe the US will use terrorists in order to destabilize a particular region. I have no evidence of that. That is me talking out of my ass. So fair enough. So then you get to the Cambodia and Thailand issue, and it's like, all right, this is weird. But again, I don't live there, so I don't know how weird this is. But to have F-16s killing people, or artillery killing people over a temple seems to be extreme. Give us a breakdown of this, because the Cambodia nominating Trump a sociopath for a Nobel Peace Prize is a red flag. And as you point out, Thailand has a weird relationship with the United States in general. What's going on with this?
Oh, yes, a lot of people are oversimplifying it. They don't understand it, and they, for whatever reason, they refuse to do the research necessary. I think you bringing up India and Pakistan is very important. People try to oversimplify it and say India is a U.S. proxy, Pakistan is closely allied to China. The reality is the U.S. has factions on both sides of the border that they can manipulate and work together with to precipitate a war between these countries that, as exactly as you say, benefits only the United States and its geopolitical objectives at the expense of both Pakistan and India, and then everyone else in the multipolar world. So to whose benefit? That is the question everyone should ask. And it only benefits the United States. The same with this conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. It is not over a temple. Yes, there is this border dispute. But for the vast majority of time, 99.999% of the time of this 21st century, there's not been any armed conflict over this temple. It only flares up at very specific junctures. And it only seems to flare up at junctures where the U.S. is maneuvering, trying to maneuver a client regime into power or keep it in power inside of Thailand. And this is an objective that Cambodia itself has helped the United States facilitate over the last 20, 25 years. Now, people have to understand, it's not as simple as Thailand has F-16s, so they're backed by the U.S., and CNN told me that Cambodia is a Chinese colony, so that must be true because CNN said it. No, it's a little bit more complicated than that. You have to look at an array of metrics and look for the vector sum of what these metrics are telling you. What people miss is that, yes, China and Cambodia, in recent years, they've had a closer relationship. China is trying to invest. They have sold military equipment to Cambodia, but nowhere on any significant scale, as people seem to imagine it. If you look at their trade, yes, most of their imports are coming from China, also from Thailand, also from Vietnam. People don't look at these things, but their exports are overwhelmingly dependent on the United States. Cambodia exports mainly to the United States, more so than all countries in Asia combined. That includes China. Yes, real. And people could go look that up if they don't believe me. Also,
no, I don't just believe you. It's just.
No. I mean, there are people out. I know you don't, but there's people out there who refuse to look these things up and see for themselves. They insist on arguing with me. They're like, Brian, you've been right about Russia and Ukraine and Iran, and I thought you were wrong about Trump, but you were right about Trump. But Brian, you are wrong about Thailand. I live here. This is where I honed my ability to do analysis, seeing it with my own eyes, experiencing it here, and it allows me to extrapolate what is being done in these other places that I've never even visited. So people should, they should think about that. So anyway, Cambodia also uses the US dollar as a local currency inside their country. So they are dependent on the United States in ways that really no other country in Southeast Asia is. It really is an outlier. Maybe kind of more in the collection with the Philippines than anywhere else. Now, Thailand is a major non-NATO treaty ally of the United States. When was this declared? This was declared in 2003. And you have to look at who was the prime minister of Thailand in 2003. It was this US-backed billionaire, Thaksin Shinawatra. He was a Carlyle Group advisor before he became prime minister. As prime minister, he was matching Thai resources and state-owned enterprises. He was privatizing it and selling it off to these equity firms that he was working with before he became prime minister. He sent Thai troops to Iraq during the 2003 invasion and then occupation, and he invited the CIA in to use Thailand for its extraordinary rendition, which is just a euphemism for torture dungeons. So that was Thaksin Shinawatra. That was what he was doing, and then he was trying to ram through a U.S.-Thai free trade deal, very similar to the lopsided concessions just made by Thailand with his daughter as prime minister, by the way. That was the final straw. The Thai military ousted him in a military coup while he was in New York City at the Council on Foreign Relations, reporting back to these interests that are essentially behind him and using him to again, pursue their interests at the expense of Thailand's interests. So this is a billionaire who doesn't care about what happens to Thailand. He is a billionaire. His fortune, his power is tied to cooperating with the West. It always has been. He never would have risen to power if he didn't get this backing. If you listen to this guy talk in English or in Thai, there's nothing really going on there. So this is the story of him. His sister was prime minister for a period of time. The Thai military ousted her from power in 2014 in another military coup. And so now his daughter is prime minister. So we always hear about the West complaining and crying about the Thai military because it is an independent institution and it serves as a check and balance to oust these U.S. client regimes when they overstep their bounds. But the U.S. also complains, targets, and wants to undermine and remove the Thai constitutional monarchy. And we hear all of these U.S. NED-funded activists. The NED is still funding opposition here in Thailand, complaining about the Thai monarchy and why is he the king just because he's born into the royal family? What about the Chenawat family? Do you guys hear what you sound like when you talk? And now the U.S. has another billionaire that they're cultivating here in Thailand, Thanathorn Juangroongruangkit. His mom and dad are billionaires. He did not.
Wait. Say that name one more time.
It's a very long surname, Juangroongruangkit. Okay. Yes. So anyway, so there's these two billionaires the U.S. backs. They have their separate political parties. Often they work openly together. At other times they pretend to be opposed. And this is a kind of a good cop, bad cop. Thaksin and his party, he's not even legally allowed to be involved in politics, and yet he openly and is the de facto leader of his political party that is his daughter is nominally the head of. And this other billionaire, his party openly opposes the military and monarchy and wants to reform them, which actually is, again, a euphemism to remove them, while Thaksin pretends that he or has tried to convince the establishment that he wants to reconcile and work together with them. But essentially, they're both U.S.-backed, and the goal is to politically capture Thailand. So Thaksin, his daughter, not his daughter, had nothing to really do with this. She's just prime minister because of her last name. They arranged this with Hun Sen of Cambodia, who is, again, nominally the leader of Cambodia, even though his son is officially the prime minister. His son is a West Point graduate, military academy graduate. The current prime minister of Cambodia is a West Point graduate. These are things that people didn't look up or understand when they just assumed that Cambodia was friendly with China and Thailand because of the Vietnam War half a century ago. They're somehow on America's side. Anyway, I'm almost there. Over the last 10, 15 years, and after Thaksin's sister was ousted in 2014, the Thai military and the civilian government that they had been backing, they did a hard pivot toward China. They replaced their U.S. military equipment with Chinese alternatives, with the exception of things like the jets, and they have old M60 main battle tanks from the U.S. from the Vietnam War. You don't throw these out. You keep them in reserve. You still use them in combat. But they were replacing them with modern Chinese weapon systems, Chinese main battle tanks, an entire fleet of them, hundreds of other armored vehicles, air defense systems, naval vessels. They even tried to purchase diesel-electric submarines, which is a major, major purchase. And again, the U.S.-backed opposition blocked this. The government under Thaksin Shinawat's political party and his daughter, they blocked this. They helped block this. Thanathorn, this other billionaire, openly blocked it. He openly blocked the Thai-Chinese high-speed rail line, which, again, that was a Belt and Road Initiative deal signed by the military-backed government after 2014, after Thaksin's sister was ousted. So Thailand has a much larger, deeper, more constructive and a substantial relationship with China than Cambodia does, no matter what CNN tells you. And regardless of the fact that they have F-16s, they also have plenty of Chinese weapons in their arsenal. Whatever Cambodia has, Thailand has many times more of in terms of Chinese weapons. I explained and also the trade, Thai trade, its largest trade partner is China. The U.S. is either, depending year to year, is either equal to China in terms of Thai exports, or sometimes China is a little bit greater. And then, of course, imports overwhelmingly dominated by China and the rest of Asia. So Thailand is in every conceivable way connected to China and the rest of Asia, with the exception of the U.S. client regime that is currently in power, and the U.S.-funded opposition in Thailand that is trying to reverse this. Cambodia, on the other hand, has a significant economic dependence on the United States. And in the last year or so, again, Hun Sen's son, a West Point graduate, people, again, they didn't look this up, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, under the Biden administration, visited Cambodia last year to start talking about building up military ties with Cambodia. A U.S. naval vessel visited Cambodia, including the port facility that China had upgraded for Cambodia. And then as this border conflict was in the middle of taking place, as Cambodia used unguided rockets to target populated areas on the Thai side of the border, which includes ethnic Cambodians. My wife's family has relatives who are ethnic Cambodian in that area who were being shelled and had to evacuate. The Cambodian military leadership went to the United States, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, to sign an agreement about vastly expanding U.S.-Cambodian military cooperation. And so it's not, it's again, it was a CNN article that said Thailand is U.S. equipped, close U.S. ally, and Cambodia is backed by China. It's literally the other way around. And then, people doubted that, but now look at Cambodia. We're going to nominate President Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. He was instrumental in solving this war that we needlessly started. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just, they can't help themselves. They can't help but expose what they're doing through things like that. But, people are stubborn, and they'll refuse to even see or consider that as well.
So it sounds like Thailand has a divided position on this. It seems like their roots are deeper with China, but they also have this kind of odd relationship with the United States. Not to mention the uneven trade deal that Thailand effectively signed with the United States. How do you see this? Do you see this as U.S. influence in both? I mean, because look, all things being equal, as I pointed out, China doesn't necessarily like to start conflicts. They don't like to be in conflicts. And if indeed with the deep roots that are associated with Thailand, I guess I don't know, I'm so confused on this. I don't buy this premise that it's China versus the US, even though I would buy the premise that the US is pushing one into the other, that is forcing the other to act, and to act at the time where there's a political division taking place in Thailand, where Thailand basically had to respond. Any country being attacked is going to respond. Where do you see this? I mean, because this was at the exact same time this deal was being signed.
Yes. Very suspicious, isn't it? So what happened is, just like we were talking about with India and Pakistan, the U.S. was using factions on both sides of the border to precipitate a war that benefited neither side. So the Cambodian government, obviously, we can look at the metrics. Yes, they have pivoted hard toward the U.S. over the last year. They obviously made some sort of deal. They were working with Thaksin Shinawatra himself. Thaksin was just in Cambodia last year, and now they're pretending like they're enemies. And it was his daughter who was making concessions to Cambodia. Yes, the phone call and the leak.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is what you call uncle, right?
Exactly. Okay. Yes, because her daddy goes playing golf with Hun Sen in Cambodia, and when Thaksin was trying to overthrow the political establishment in Thailand through two U.S.-backed, very, very violent color revolutions in 2009, 2010, all of his facilitators fled to Cambodia and were harbored there by Hun Sen and allowed to continue agitating Thailand from Cambodia for years and years and years. So they likely worked together. His daughter, this leaked, and it was leaked by Cambodia, and it was done deliberately to force the Thai military into an impossible situation where the civilian government is making concessions that the military would obviously never accept, that the Thai people would never accept. There were protests that people were asking about. Is this an Eddie D-funded color revolution? I said, no. This is opposition to the current US-backed client regime in power. They want that regime out. They want Thai interests to determine Thai's destiny, not a client regime where everything is being decided in Washington and for Washington. So the Thai system is divided because there is US influence and interference and a US-backed client regime in power right now. And the military is a counterbalance to that. And they were forced into this situation. And what this did was distract everybody on both sides of the border. It caused the Thai military to be wrapped up in this very urgent and serious crisis. So they have no time or resources to focus on the civilian government and what it's doing on behalf of the US. And then these trade deals were rammed through. And the details of the trade deal, it's essentially zero tariffs on US products, no import control on any of it. Whatever the US sends, Thailand and Cambodia both have to take it. They have to buy ridiculous amounts of Boeing aircraft, these flying death traps that weren't being sold because they were falling out of the sky and killing people. And instead of fixing that and rebuilding trust, President Trump, because he does work for the deep state, which are these giant corporations, including Boeing and their shareholders, what he did was he coerced these nations to accept them and to buy large quantity, unnecessary quantities of them. So that's how they were resolving that. That's President Trump fighting the deep state by completely working for the deep state. They're also allowing Google and Amazon to get unprecedented access and trade barriers taken down so that they can wrap their tentacles around the information space here in Southeast Asia even further than it already is. And this is where I get to China and what I think is kind of a flawed strategy, where they think just offering a better deal is all they have to do to win over Southeast Asia. No, not if the US politically captures these countries, puts a small handful of people into the position of power where they make this decision, and then they make a decision that is completely contra to the best interests of Thailand or Cambodia and completely serves US hegemony. No, then that strategy for China doesn't work and will fail. So you see the US using its political capture or even partial capture of these countries to ram through these trade deals and to disrupt both Southeast Asia's unity and their cooperation with China and their collective rise together, which circles all the way back to what we always talk about. The ultimate objective of the US is global hegemony. Russia in Europe, Iran in the Middle East, China, and all of Asia here in this region. This is what they're trying to reassert control over, and that is how you do it.
Why do you think China doesn't get that? I mean, obviously the US is playing hardball, and I'm divided on this. So it seems that BRICS nations, with fulcrum being Russia and China, have made this argument that, look, the US is a naked hegemon. And because the US is a naked hegemon, you are giving up sovereignty if you're indeed going to make deals with that naked hegemon. Meaning, you may have had this kind of pleasant hegemon before, but this is not what's taking place. The more desperate the US, and let's say the Western world gets, the more naked they are in the way that they're trying to exert control and exert power. Most countries bristle at that. Just as a human being, you bristle at it. And so Russia's argument seems to be, we won't interfere into your domestic politics. We will give you a choice where you can choose this naked hegemon that is making the argument that we are number one, we should be number one, and you should worship us, versus us, who we believe in this kind of multipolar world, this global world order. On paper, you would think that that argument works. In practice, if you can use some kind of leverage in order to compel behavior, the argument becomes more difficult to make. Maybe it works in the long run. In the short run, as you point out, you get your tentacles in a particular country, in their information space, in their political space, in a way that makes it that much more difficult for you to make any kind of agreement with a country that may be this kind of kumbaya country at the moment. So I get their argument, but I also get the contrary argument of these guys are not playing even. They are playing to win, and they're playing to win by beg, borrow, steal, bite, kick, whatever, in order to maintain this level of primacy. Give me a take on that, because that does seem to be the argument that China and Russia are making to the rest of the world. We believe in international law. We don't want to interrupt or interfere into your domestic politics. We will offer you deals. Those deals will be fair, better, etc. So it is natural for you to come to our side, especially if you don't want to be stuck under vassalage by a naked hegemon. Is that argument working?
No, it doesn't. I agree with you completely on this, where that is the arrangement. Both sides are making a deal, but then the U.S., in addition to making its very poor, unappealing deal, they reach into the country and they scoop out the people who would decide in their own nation's best interest. They scoop them out of power and they install a client regime in its place, which is exactly what is happening right now in Thailand, which is why the military is opposed to the current government, which is why they wanted to get them out, which is why they've overthrown two Thaksin governments this 21st century already, and want to get rid of this one way or the other. And so it's not an even deal. It's not a choice, really, because the U.S. is taking over that nation's ability to make a good decision in their own interest through political interference, through color revolution, through client regimes. And the ultimate destination for a nation politically captured by the U.S. is Ukraine, where it's turned into a battering ram and it commits national suicide for Washington at its own expense in terms of its own existence as a nation state. And to one degree or another, this is what the United States wants to do to other nations in Europe, and you can see them actively succeeding. And this is what they're trying to do here in Southeast Asia. I've spent years talking about Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar. I've talked about Anwar Abraham in Malaysia. A lot of people said, Brian, you were wrong about him. I mean, he was literally working with the NED for most of his political career. Only just recently, he appears to be reasonable, but people better keep an eye on him because he's in photographs, group photos with the NED in Washington, D.C. And he was marching around with Bersi, which was an NED-backed street movement, a color revolution in Malaysia. And we have the NED people in a video on their own official website where they're bragging about how they overthrew the Malaysian political order and installed their guy into office. So people better keep a close eye on him.
Wait, you mean here in Malaysia?
Yes, Malaysia, yes. So look, for the time being, I don't know. It seems like maybe he changed his mind, but do people like that change their mind? All I'm saying is keep a close eye on him. Look at the documented evidence. It's irrefutable. And just keep it in mind. People need to be vigilant. So, but what I'm not saying is that Russia and China should counter U.S. interference with Russian and Chinese interference. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying Russia and China know how to secure their political space, their information space. They understand how to create an education system that serves their interests, not American interests or Western interests. And what they need to do is work with these countries to help build up their capacity to defend themselves against political interference, which is completely different than what the U.S. is doing. It's not interference in and of itself. It is protection against it. And they need to be more vocal about this globally. At the UN, they need to talk about how the U.S. is coercing and capturing nations around the globe, and how this is blatantly contra to the UN Charter and its guarantees for political independence for every country on Earth, and how the U.S. tramples this blatantly and repeatedly and constantly. So I think they can do more in that area. I don't know why they aren't, but we could only just keep trying to raise awareness and maybe create downward pressure up to get something going, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's because what you said in the beginning. It's like the U.S. screams that Russia is. Look, as I told Arnaud, I got to be honest, they're never going to get a good headline in the West. Why do they care about a good headline in the West? And maybe the issue is not the West. Maybe the issue is everywhere else. One thing, Aung San Suu Kyi, you got it. Let's talk about that just for a moment, just for a few minutes. Explain that to me, because what it seems to be was that the military had, let's say, a stranglehold on Myanmar politics, and that she was this political element that was pushing against the military's power in that situation, where they effectively had her in political captivity in her own home for what, decades, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, I haven't hit the sword in a long time. Why do you, from your point of view, she was a U.S. plant, but the military.
Yeah, irrefutably, she was. I mean, she's also in Washington at NED events for decades. She speaks perfect English with a beautiful British accent. I mean, she is an agent of modern day Western imperialism. The NED built up her entire political organization. They have taken over education. You're saying that the military, I don't think that they had a stranglehold on politics. I think they were hanging on for their life. And it's not to praise the Myanmar military. There's plenty to say about them. But the reason why they removed her from power was because she was literally recolonizing Myanmar on behalf of the US and the British, who are Myanmar's former colonial masters. Aung San Suu Kyi, for that brief window where she was in power, she literally had white guys in her inner circle rewriting the constitution, rearranging Myanmar's economic policies, advising her, running her media campaigns. I mean, literal British, Americans, Australians running around Myanmar like modern day colonial viceroys, just running around, running everything with just her as the figurehead. And the whole movement, this armed movement against the central government and military right now, these are all US funded organizations and militant organizations. And again, there are white guys running around with guns inside Myanmar, training them, going on patrol with them. I've talked about them, Free Burma Rangers. There's WikiLeaks diplomatic cables where these guys are reporting back to the Thai consulate in Chiang Mai, which is very close in proximity, relative proximity to Myanmar. And so it is a huge, dirty war the US is fighting in Myanmar, right on China's border. These militants just so happen to attack Chinese factories. They attacked the pipelines, which are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. They were stirring up trouble in Rakhine province. This was where the pipeline terminates and oil is onshored and sent to China without going through the Malacca Strait. So it's really, the US does all of this to attack the Belt and Road Initiative in ways they can't do directly. If they could, they would just bomb it, carpet bomb the Belt and Road Initiative, but they can't. So they back these armed militants and these political groups to first oppose it politically, try to block it, but if it's built, then just have literal armed terrorists attack and try to physically destroy it.
And China doesn't get involved. Like, they don't back groups that are more aligned with national interests, or do they? I mean, if they did, I wouldn't get the sense that they would be loud about it. It would be very subversive. But do they?
It's hard to tell because, like you say, they're not doing it openly. Something is going on in Myanmar where a lot of these armed groups are handing territory back to the central government because of deals the Chinese government apparently made with them. What deals? I don't know. I don't know what's going on there, but they're trying to do things. I just don't know if they're doing enough. And again, if they were to create a means of exporting the means to defend information space in the same way they export actual weapons to protect the physical domains of these nations' national security, this wouldn't have happened in the first place. There's not going to be a color revolution in Russia or China anytime soon because they know how to do that. They need to export that know-how and the tools necessary to implement this to all of these other nations aspiring to join this multipolar world, or the US is going to pick them off one at a time. And we can see how successful they are in not just capturing these countries, but then utilizing that capture to disrupt the collective rise of Asia and the multipolar world as a whole.
Brian, great breakdown. Great breakdown. Best breakdown I've heard on this up to this point. Like I said, I've heard people give their takes. In some cases, this is about agency. In some cases, the US is pushing one or the other. This is a really good breakdown because it explains some of the complications when you're looking at this, thinking to yourself, okay, what the hell is going on here? Why is this functioning this way? And just get your take on something else that I think I already know what your answer is going to be on this. But my president came out recently, gave a speech, and according to him, he was able to solve the Indian conflict, the Pakistan conflict, and this conflict, especially after the loss of thousands and thousands and thousands of people that apparently died as this was being solved and stopped by him. As that Indian woman pointed out, thank God that Donald Trump helps, gravity works. Thank God that he worked with Jesus so we can see another day. This is Trump. Listen to what he says here.
Potential wars. I mean, if you look at the one that we just stopped, they had thousands of people being dead already at the border between Thailand and Cambodia. Thousands of people. And I've seen some bad things, but that October 7th was with Hamas was really, really bad.
There weren't thousands of people that died. There were probably dozens or maybe scores, not thousands. I mean, any loss of life is tragic. But look, President Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a performer. He's there to distract people. He's there to sell to people, divide and distract and sell narratives to people. He thinks the S in BRICS is Spain. I mean, this is all you need to know about the people who are like trying to get inside his mind. His mind is like a giant empty aircraft hangar. There's nothing in there to talk about except what flies through there.
Yeah.
What people tell him to say and do. So
he
doesn't know what's going on.
I don't think anybody told him to say that. I just think habitual liars lie. He just
says whatever because he doesn't know. It's like, yeah, it's like my little kids. They don't know. They don't have a sense of proportion. So everything is forever and a million thousand. You know what I mean? And this is President Trump is a grown man who's supposedly president of the United States, and he's doing this. It should be alarming to many Americans, but unfortunately, too many Americans find it comforting. He can do no wrong. They're not, even though they know in their heart and in the back of their mind, this man is doing the exact opposite of what they voted him into office to do. But because they do this divide, distract, and rule with the American people, at least it's not Kamala Harris who is going to take us to war with Iran and create all these problems and not end the Ukraine war, which is exactly what Trump is doing. He started all these wars. He's not ending any of them. But at least it's not Kamala not doing any of these things that we wanted Trump to do.
I think they believed him when they voted for him, thinking I think they actually believed him. I mean, me, I was open. I was like, all right, let's see what he does. And at the point, it was like,
I knew he wasn't going to. I knew. I was 100. If there was a wager, I would have wagered everything that he wasn't going to change anything.
Oh, I wouldn't have wagered anything on that bet. Either way, I wouldn't have wagered anything about that. It's like this guy is a wild card. He can do anything. Do you think that ultimately he gets elected because Americans wanted to feel better about themselves? Like you had a segment of the population that can look at the world and say, hey, China is building skyscrapers. China is building high-speed rail. China is putting people on the moon. China is doing all of this stuff. And we can see our wages declining. We can see our bridges collapsing. I am not making as much as I used to make, et cetera, et cetera. And here you have a guy who's like, we're fantastic. We're going to be great. And he will lie to you in your face about any and everything at any moment at the drop of a hat. And people wanted to hear that. Do you think it's that? Or do you think no, they actually believe he was going to win the wars. He was going to end the wars. He was going to end the conflicts. He wasn't going to get involved in wars. He was going to make the economy awesome. He's a businessman. And because he's a businessman, he's going to do great things. Meaning, do you think they just believe the hype?
I agree with the first option. I think they're desperate. They're desperate for change. This is why they voted for Obama, because he offered them hope and change. And that's all President Trump offered them was hope and change, except, with the marketing of MAGA and America First. But it was the exact same illusion or delusion that he was selling people. He, again, if you listen to him while he was campaigning, he made it clear he wasn't going to end any of these wars. It was only going to get worse. People said, well, J.D. Vance is the voice of reason. He said we needed these weapons to go wage war with China, which is a larger, more dangerous war than already you have with Russia, which, as you pointed out, could end all life on Earth already. Yeah. But they want to wage an even larger war. And if you listen to J.D. Vance carefully, again, before voting even took place, he was saying, we need to freeze the conflict, not end it. He wasn't talking about addressing the root cause. And the root cause, and the Trump administration has admitted this multiple times, the root cause is it is a U.S. proxy war with Russia. Yeah. They admit that out of one side of their mouth, they admit that it's a U.S. proxy war against Russia. Out of the other side of their mouth, they're pretending to be mediators between Russia and Ukraine. And so it's just deliberate dishonesty. And this is how I knew, and because everything is determined by these policy papers. There is a whole slew of policy papers connected to the Trump administration directly that were carried over from these central think tanks. And they all said this exactly what is happening now is what they were going to do. And I was screaming, warning people, and people said that I had lost my mind. They're like, Brian, you have been right about everything up until now, but I think you have Trump derangement syndrome. You're wrong. You just hate Trump. You hate America. You're Chinese. You're a CCP shill. You're a Putin puppet. But look at where we are right now. A lot of those same people have come back and apologized to me because they can see with their own eyes. Other people are going to lie to themselves because they, my friend Rashid, he always says people, they will pick delusion over reality because it's just too much for them to accept. They can't accept it. It overwhelms them. I think that's where we are right now.
I'm going to close this out. Thank you for this. I think people don't have a choice, like meaning in a political sense, there is no choice. Whether it was Kamala Harris or whether it was Donald Trump, as you pointed out, the playbook was effectively the same. It would take the system to either collapse or it would take something outside of the political space. I don't know what that's. I can't see around corners. Brian Berletic, Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the New Atlas. He has a fantastic show. Brian gives fantastic breakdowns. Thank you for this, man. I really do appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for having me, and say hello to Mark for me.
Oh, I will. He's going to be on in a few minutes. Have a good one, man. Be safe. All right. Brian is fantastic. Brian gets great breakdowns. Yeah, he follows the policy papers. And it does give kind of almost like a map of where these guys are going one way or the other. And again, as I said, I think I've said before, I can be open to a particular candidate without leaning one way or the other. Just kind of say, okay, well, let's see what he does. But at a certain point, it became very clear the direction that Donald Trump was going. An American president doesn't seem to be able to accept a loss. And not just able to accept a loss, especially in the context of the Ukraine conflict. As Brian pointed out, what they wanted to do was freeze the conflict, not end it. Those are two drastically different things. Freezing a conflict allows you to get back to something that is just frozen, that can go hide at any particular moment when it's not at the best interest of, let's say, one of the parties in that conflict, which is what ultimately the US wanted and what they ultimately did in Syria, which is part and parcel to the reason Russia said, we're not doing that yet. No. Absolutely not. We're going to settle this. We're going to solve this. If there's a deal, maybe, but otherwise we will keep moving. Pursuant to that, there is something that is fascinating that is taking place right now. Big maneuver warfare is what I would call it, even though it's happening very quietly. It's not something that's being announced. It's not something that's being talked about per se, but it definitely looks like it is happening, which is why I'm very eager to talk to Mark about this. This is the battle map that is taking place right now. Back in World War II, they had Operation Uranus. Operation Uranus was this hundreds of kilometer encirclement of the German military, especially going around from the standpoint of Stalingrad, which eventually was a death knell for Germany, where they realized, oh my God, the Soviets aren't effing around. I would argue, I'm not a military maps guy. So again, I'm looking for Mark to break this down, even though I think I'm right. This is the map, the battlefield map. Take a look at these locations. So you have multiple things happening in Kupiansk, Seversk, Konstantinovka, I believe it's what it's called. Basically, you have multiple locations that are hotspots that the Russian military is pressing simultaneously. Petrovsk is about to fall. Chasiv Yar has fallen. And with the fall of Chasiv Yar, you've gotten far more battle space in order to operate. Notice something, though. Hotspot, 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 hotspot. What happens if this turns in? And what happens if this turns in? You have an encirclement. And I hear Mark here, so good. I want to go to him because I'm super curious to get his take on this. We are joined with the man himself, Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can find Mark on Boosty, Boosty, under Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda, or if you can put in his name, Mark Sleboda, he will come up under both of those. Mark, you doing okay today, man? How you doing?
I'm alive, Jamal. How are you? Thanks for having me on the show. It's always an honor and a pleasure.
I am doing fine. I got to get your take on something. I always like to bounce the stuff off of you because #reasons, and you tend to know your stuff. I think that there is a return to big maneuver warfare, even though it's very quiet and it hasn't necessarily been spoken. And my reason for coming to that kind of assessment is this map. This is the battlefield and some of the hotspots that are taking place on this battlefield. I'm going to butcher this name. You can correct me. Konstantinovka. Did I get that right? Konstantinovka. Thank you. You have Petrovsk or Pokrovsk. You have Chasiv Yar, Kupiansk. All of these are hotspots.
Liman.
If you look at them, what was the other one?
Liman, Seversk.
Exactly, right. All right. So if you look at this, what it looks like is a large encirclement maneuver taking place. I mean, the only thing you would need is for this to turn in, and you would need this to turn in. Both of these are spots where the Russian military seems to be advancing, but they're pushing on all fronts. But if this turns in, you have a large encirclement of the Donbas region. Am I getting this wrong?
Yeah. That is too big of an area to encircle. This is just movement forward, the same strategy of attrition, now with more effectiveness because of the greater strength of the Russian military and the continued deterioration of the Kiev regime military. Russia's now, moving all along the contact line and able to engage 5 or 6 major urban areas at the same time.
Simultaneously. I see. So just to be clear, this is not encirclement. This is just.
I mean, not in a big theater encirclement, right? That would require the injection of 1 or 2 entirely new armies, which Russia has in reserve, we're told, the Wall Street Journal. But they would have to penetrate deep behind the lines, and then there would be lots of problems with logistics and supplying those troops. It's not impossible, but there's no signs that that's happening, right? What is happening is a continuation of what Russia has been doing all along the contact line. It's just that Russia is meeting greater success faster because of their forces keep getting stronger, and the opponent, because of the strategy of attrition, keeps weakening. There was just a report from a Kiev regime Rada deputy, an MP, right, a member of their Putsch parliament, just yesterday admitting that the Kiev regime military over the course of the conflict now has 400,000 deserters. 400,000 deserters. That's more than most of the armies of European NATO put together.
Yeah, I saw that. In fact, I have that video, actually. That's a hell of an admission. That is a hell of an admission. If they have that many deserters, how many people do they have on the battlefield? Do we know?
I would say probably less of combat troops, right? The Kiev regime still on paper claims to have 1 million people, right? They've always claimed that. They claim ridiculous things that Trump evidently repeats nonsensically about their numbers and about their losses and Russian losses. But if we're talking combat troops, right, not people in the reserve doing logistics and that sort of thing, I think we're probably looking at less than 200,000 at this point. And unfortunately, the problem is that those aren't all committed ideological forces anymore, like they maybe were earlier in the conflict. Now we're looking that the majority of them, perhaps as many as 60 to 70%, are freshly conscripted men who do not want to be there, who do not want to fight and die for this regime, are not military people, are not ideological, and have no training whatsoever. And they're simply handed a gun and told to defend a building or a trench or a fortification.
Two things. One, I wonder if she has a husband. Two, why is she admitting this? Like, that's a hell of an admission to make, that we have more deserters than we may have active fighters on the battlefield. That's a hell of an admission for somebody in the RADA to admit. What is going on in the RADA where they would own up to this?
Yeah, okay, so we saw some political intrigues in the last couple of weeks, right? We talked about it last week, about the possibility that, that Seymour Hersh mentioned that the U.S. was moving to get rid of Zelensky. I argued that wasn't the case. At least there wasn't any evidence of that. There was obviously some intrigues going on, but it seemed more like, to me, that the European Union countries, separate from the United States, was slapping Zelensky's hand for going after a leverage of their power over him, his administration, and the Ukrainian Maidan regime in general, which was these anti-corruption watchdogs of NABU and SAPO that they had a de facto control over through the way that its directors were selected and the commissions that controlled that and so forth. So that was my assessment of what happened, and that it wasn't a regime change attempt as Seymour Hersh was suggesting would happen. The U.S. wasn't involved. There weren't enough other signs. This was more pressure on Zelensky, and almost certainly coming primarily from the Europeans. Now, with all of that going on, and with the continued, really at this point, no matter how Baghdad Bob level the propaganda coming out of Kiev, they just can't deny a lot of things anymore. And so people are starting to, voice out of desperation how bad the situation is, and increasingly starting to cast blame at each other, as they will, as will happen in situations like this. So there is a political deterioration that is I would argue, a direct result of the military, the battlefield deterioration going on as well. There was another example of this type of, shall we say, admission where there weren't such admission, cracks in the propaganda wall that we haven't seen before, is an interview that the Kiev regime's military intelligence chief, the genocidal sociopath Krylu I like the dark Budanov gave to Ukrainian media. And he was outright talking that unless things dramatically change, and he actually seemed more like he was talking about a change of course for the Kiev regime to enter into negotiations, although he didn't say that outright. But he said that there was a possibility. What he was saying was that the Ukrainian state could cease to exist. and he created an allegory, to look at it. And he admitted that, that he's a stamp collector, because I guess genocidal sociopaths collect stamps too.
Stamp collector.
I don't know. Bizarre.
What? How random. Yeah. Okay.
He collects stamps, and he was mentioning that he can't help but notice that in his stamp collection, dating back to like 1900 or something, that there is a lot of stamps representing countries, states that no longer exist. And he was very grimly and very soberly assessing that Ukraine could soon join the ranks of those countries that don't exist. Now, this is the same guy who a couple years ago was forecasting how the Kiev regime would be celebrating summer in Crimea, right? Before the failed 2023 offensive. But this was a Budanov that we have not seen before. He looks beaten. He looks beaten. First of all, he's in the daylight, so that's.
Well, I was about to say that. Yeah,
in the sunlight. Maybe he's been cured of his vampirism or whatever. I don't know, because he did before. The last time he gave an interview to the Western press, he was in a dark room and I don't like the light and so forth. Now, he's out in the daylight and he's talking about the end of Ukraine as a state being a distinct possibility, unless there is some drastic change very soon. He seemed like a beaten dog, a rabid dog, but a beaten one nonetheless.
Speaking,
I say that not for beating dogs, because I have dogs myself. It's just an expression.
It's just the way he looks. Yeah, he looks resigned to his fate on some level. No, agreed. Okay, you've destroyed my pet theory. My pet theory was that Russia was in a silent, quiet, big maneuver warfare thing. Fair enough. I accept that, but they're not. But I was looking at stuff like this, where this is them going after bridges on the Dnieper. I mean, just taking them out. Now, this was something they wouldn't do before. So this is new. Like
That's not true. I mean, if you're talking a bridge over the Dnieper, okay, well, bridges actually over the Dnieper have been destroyed before too. Now, that was more often the case when Russia was withdrawing from the other side of the Dnieper back in the autumn of 2022, because the Kiev regime mobilized and Russia didn't, and was still naively counting on negotiations that were,
I see.
They withdrew. But Russia has destroyed bridges, and the Kiev regime has destroyed their own bridges all through this conflict. I mean, that is a regular occurrence. Now, the big thing, I guess, is that this is Kherson.
Right. Here's another view of
I'm not seeing any signs of a big Russian move towards Kherson, so it's probably more about logistics in general. But that was a big, and it should be noted, right, how solid Soviet bridges are built and how difficult it actually is to destroy them, because that did not completely destroy that bridge. They'll have to hit it again.
Wow. Somebody was saying that they think it was a test in order to figure out what they need to actually destroy those bridges.
That's possible. That's entirely possible.
From my understanding, though, this was explain what is taking place on the battlefield where they would do that. I mean, that was in Kherson. There were also attacks that were taking place in Petrovsk.
Because there's no other big warfare there going on in Kherson. I see no, again, Russia is moving forward in the south as well, right? Like there is a move up in Zaporozhye, but there isn't anything in Kherson because you have to cross the river there. And there's no signs. I mean, Russia is still... the Kiev regime was complaining that Russia took another island in the Dnieper River, right across from Kherson, but there is no sign at the moment that Russia is gearing up for any type of contested river crossing or something that could happen in the future sometime, but there's no signs of it happening now. So either it's general logistics deterioration, or, hey, that suggestion, it hadn't, that hadn't crossed my mind that it was a test about exactly what would be required. That would make a certain amount of sense too. But there's no other big looming military action that I can see. And that may change. I mean, maybe something secret is going on and I haven't gotten, any signs of it, any data points suggesting it. But right now it kind of seems out of the blue, to be perfectly honest.
What's going on the battlefield in regards to, is it just a constant pressure that is taking place? Patrol?
Yeah, constant pressure. What the Kiev regime is complaining about now, they're talking about, they're complaining about infiltration of Russian DRG groups, diversion and reconnaissance groups. And this is a result of the Kiev regime not having enough manpower anymore to properly man the contact line, right? Now, first of all, again, we've talked about this before, but people would be surprised generally when at the contact line, how small the forces that on a day-to-day basis usually engage, are, right? These are at most company level, often a platoon and even squadron level, right? Or smaller. And that is a new reality of near-peer conflict in the modern day, when you have 24/7 satellite surveillance and 24/7 drone surveillance, and you have, FPV drone warfare and accurate precision strikes that can be directed. So anytime you mass troops, right, to make a push somewhere, you have to amass troops, get a critical mass, and then move forward, right, to break through a defensive area and so forth. And when you do that, the enemy can see it, identify it, right, very quickly through a combination of drones and satellites, and rain down precision strikes, or if not big precision strikes, artillery, missiles, rockets, if not, well, then at the very least, swarms of FPV drones. Yeah. It makes it very hard to amass large amounts of troops in any one place, right? I mean, when you have a couple $1 million tank taken out by a $20,000 or $30,000 or even a $5,000, those are strike drones. Sorry, a $2,000 or $3,000 FPV drone, right, with a warhead attached to it. Obviously, that is not good attrition math, right? Which is why both sides are using armored vehicles much less than they have been previously, particularly in the first year of the conflict, because you just can't continue to make those trades. So it's not that you don't use armored vehicles like tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, APCs. It's that you don't use them as much, and you only use them sparingly, and for specific when you want to make that big push, and you believe that you have significantly deteriorated the other side's drone and artillery forces in that area, right? Because otherwise, or when you're willing to take a few hits, right? So that is constantly ongoing. So what that result is that at the line of contact, a lot of the encounter battles are relatively small, right? And now the Kiev regime doesn't have enough people, right? We keep talking about their manpower problems, their losses, their desertion, their problems conscripting people. Everything adds up, and all the damage, of course, that that Russia is doing with all at the contact line, in the operational rear, the long range strikes. Everything adds up, and so Russian DRG groups, sometimes 2, 3, 4 people are able then to slip across those defensive lines and take up position to the rear of some forces that are still remaining on the contact line, because there's just, the contact line is huge. Ukraine is a big country, right? I mean, it's almost the entirety of the border of Europe, in lengthwise, right? We're talking something bigger than the size of Texas, and it's hard to man all of that, and particularly because Russia has a deliberate strategy of applying pressure all along that contact line to spread those forces out thinner and to create exactly the situation. So as a combination of the process of attrition and just the general manpower woes, Russia's now able to insert forces regularly behind the front lines, which makes everything start to crumble much faster as people find that the Russians are behind them. And they're complaining that this is happening in Pokrovsk. They're claiming that everyone in Pokrovsk is a DRG group, which is not the case anymore. But they're complaining about it more generally, not only across the wider Pokrovsk region, the area there, but all across the contact line. And like I said, Russia has plenty of troops. They have plenty of highly trained troops, right? Their numbers keep growing, right? This was admitted by Kiev regime figures that the Russian military is getting at least, they say, 100,000 bigger a year. I would argue that it's actually substantially more than that, maybe double that number. When you add up their volunteer recruitment and their you subtract their losses from KIA, from casualties, and then wounded people were wounded or coming back in. When you do up all the math, Russia is still gaining well in excess of 100,000 people a year, and that's the Kiev regime side. Well, their numbers keep getting smaller. So they can't man the contact line, and Russia can deteriorate their defenses along the contact line that much easier, that quicker, without wasting, or putting at risk substantial amounts of armored vehicles, which is what would be required for that maneuver warfare that you're all hot to see, right? The conflict is different. Right? This is a different kind of war. American media and generals, Mark Milley, his fantasies about what was going to happen during the 2023 summer offensive, this U.S. Jedi art of maneuver warfare, that's dead, right? That was decimated, right? It didn't fail. It was wiped out by Russian defenses, right? They never even got past the first of 5 defensive lines. Now they're talking about actually building new defensive lines to the rear, like right at the border of the Donbas region, right? As a fallback position from even Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka, which they are expecting to lose by sometime, before the end of the year. And it won't do them any good because they don't have enough people to man them, right? I mean, even if you're talking that, okay, they'll to a certain extent get smaller as they move back, but they're losing more troops every day too, and Russia is gaining more troops every day. That's the inevitable math of attrition warfare. But right now, that's the way it still has to be fought. Now, you can see interesting, I would say, small elements of maneuver warfare, right? It doesn't mean that elements of it don't occur. This deep flanking penetration to the north of Pokrovsk towards Rodinskaya, which is a village that's on one of the last 2 key supply routes that come into Pokrovsk. Russia penetrated deep behind the defensive lines and then cut a flank around Pokrovsk, and that is a bit of maneuver warfare going on. Not huge numbers, but obviously armored vehicles are involved there and everything. And as this crumbling of the front line continues, I don't like the word collapse because I don't believe in a sudden collapse scenario. But as it crumbles locally, you will see more and more examples, not only of infiltration, but of these deeper penetrations as well. In World War II, the Soviet Red Army was the master of deep penetrations, and we don't have it on quite that scale and exploit that now because, again, a conflict is different. Long-range precision strikes, they're much more accurate, much more plentiful, surveillance and everything. And the sizes of the armies are not what they were on the Eastern Front in World War II. There is that too. But you will increasingly see more of it, right? It's inevitable.
Well, that's pretty shocking, Mark, because my president said that he had just been informed that 20,000 Russian soldiers died this month alone.
112,000 soldiers since the beginning of the year, right?
And
now,
only
I'm sure that is what Zelensky is telling him. Meanwhile,
8,000 dead Ukrainians.
I know. Yes, Russian has all these advantages, right? In manpower, in artillery, in air power, in drones, in munitions, and everything else. But somehow there's 112 to 8,000. I mean, it's just absurd, right? It is. Yeah. It would make Baghdad Bob blush. The U.S. president. I'm sure this is what the Kiev regime is telling him, because according to them, they've only lost 41,000 people since this entire conflict. Yet Russia keeps returning to them 6,000 and 8,000 bodies at a time, and saying, "Take them. We don't want them." Right? Media Zona, a Western-funded Russian opposition media outlet. Right now, they don't work, at least they don't have a legal entity inside Russia anymore. Of course, they have people still, working for them here. They have been doing an assessment of Russian losses, of what you could consider verifiable. And they know how to dig up every last dead soldier in Russia, right? They have, I would suggest that they have contacts, within the military that they're able to get some information, probably for some money in exchange for, but they also know, they peruse the papers, they stake out the cemeteries, they go to people's houses. I have full confidence that if there's a dead Russian soldier, they're able in 90% of cases to find evidence of it. They can't find, I don't know, the last time it was around 112,000 the last time I looked. Maybe it's around 120,000 at the distance now. They've started to change their methodology because they started coming under pressure from the Western governments that they were ruining the propaganda. They weren't coming up with enough. So then they started a new methodology where public, at the bottom line, they add in a presumed number of losses that we can't find any evidence of. And I mean, the numbers still actually don't increase it by anywhere near the insane numbers that you're talking there. But you can still find their actual numbers of what they actually find evidence of. And so we're talking maybe 120,000 dead in the last 3 years, not 112,000 in the last 6 months. It's absurd propaganda. There's no way that Russia is suffering, I mean, even if you were talking casualties rather than dead, right? I mean, even if you were talking that there's 6 injured for every dead person or something like that, even then, I mean, the truth of casualties on both sides is that 80 to 90%, well, no, it depends on the type of casualty, but a substantial number, a majority of casualties, right, which is dead and injured, right? A majority of casualties will at some point be returned fully to service, right? Now, obviously, people that lose arms and legs and things like that, those are when Russia presents when the Russian military presents numbers, what they usually present is what they call permanent losses of their opponents. And that is dead and injured to the extent that they can't return to combat. Right. And that's actually a much more specific number being presented. Now, you don't have to take that number, 100%. I don't. I take everything with a grain of salt. But I generally think the course of the last 3 years of this conflict, the information presented on both sides tells us clearly that the Russians have been far more accurate, far more honest with the information they have presented than the other side has. Right? I tend to believe those numbers more or less. And so, I mean, and again, we have Media Zona, Western-funded info warfare outlet, right? Essentially backing that up. Of course, they don't want to talk about that, right? No one wants to admit, because this is part of the propaganda that is necessary in order for them to consider, to continue a war that is, wiping out the Ukrainian people.
Do you think he believes that number? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Do you think he believes that number? I
got the sense he did. I have the sense he did. Yeah. I have the sense that was a number that was presented to him, and that's what he's gone with. Right now, my question then would be, Tulsi, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
She's his director of national intelligence. Forget the Epstein files, right? I mean, or what she's not doing Epstein. She's doing Russiagate, right? Of course, that's his hot priority. But I guess that's important, everything. But surely she can manage to present some actually credible casualty numbers. But we also know that when he's presented with information he doesn't like Tulsi did previously, about uranium, the Iranians not having a nuclear weapons program, he just ignored it and went with what Netanyahu was telling him. So whether he's being told quietly some credible number that U.S. intelligence is coming up with and is discounting it, or he's never being told a more credible number, I don't know. But my read of his is that he believed that number, which, again, that tells us how we can never, there can never be a diplomatic settlement of this conflict when he's operating from a completely erroneous assumption of how the conflict is going, right? Obviously, he thinks he's surprised that Russia hasn't cut a deal, right? Because he thinks Russia is suffering some types of mass casualties, which the media is saying all the time, that there's never any evidence of that presented, that there's nothing on the battlefield that says that is happening. But, that is obviously informing his assumptions, his expectations. And Putin himself, just in a conversation, with Lukashenko to the public, that he gave over the last few days, he directly addressed Trump disappointment, saying that disappointment always comes from having excessive expectations. And I think he was talking more about Trump expecting that he would be able to coerce or I don't know, charisma Putin into giving him concessions, the losing side of this conflict. But the Kremlin has endured, the Russian people have endured too much. They're not going to give any concessions to stave some shred of face for Donald Trump, because Russian national interests are at stake, right? This is an existential situation for them in their security assessment, and they're not going to settle for anything less than what they've said all along. And the West, has just ignored. They keep saying it, and they we don't know what you want. And we said what we want, right? They just ignore it. That we can't. Not only can we not possibly give you that, we can't even possibly talk about that you're demanding it, right? That's what your terms, for a ceasefire, for a permanent end to the conflict are. They don't even, they don't even want to say the words. It's, it's not helping things, right? Because I have a bad feeling, and I've heard this suggested from people that supposedly are close to Trump, but that Trump gets more of his information from Fox News than he does from his own intelligence, which, to be fair, U.S. intelligence has previously participated in obviously politicized hoaxes and slurs to try to keep him out of office. So he has very little reason to trust U.S. intelligence, and U.S. intelligence has been lying to the public, or certainly the Pentagon has, and usually when U.S. intelligence is giving information, like casualty numbers to the New York Times, it's an anonymous source within intelligence. They're not even fessing up to it, which means, of course, that if no one is accountable for it, then it's almost certainly disinformation being disseminated in the media. So that's where we are. If we're operating from two different fundamental realities of what's going on the battlefield, then obviously there are vastly different expectations going into any type of diplomacy that is or more is not going on. So until Trump is properly advised and convinced of the reality on the battlefield that we have been addressing, good and bad, right, for the last 3 years, he's still being fed, Orwellian propaganda, and he can't possibly make good policy decisions. I mean, it's no guarantee that he would make good policy decisions anyway, but it's quite obvious, from that interview to me, that he believed the numbers he was saying. Which is
no, I agree with you. That's why I asked you. I do agree. I mean, it's so incompetent. Like, it's so separate from the reality. Just as you point out, just the numbers of bodies. The rule.
It's not the exception, right?
Yeah.
The Russia experts, right? Whether they are in the academic, the ivory tower, the think tanks, in the intelligence services, right? The Russia desk at the CIA. So it seems that everyone was saying that Russia's economy would collapse under Western sanctions, right? They really believed that. And that wasn't Trump. That was the Biden administration. Right. And if you go back over the years, you see they continually get Russia wrong. They get it wrong about the support of the Russian people for their politicians, for the the Kremlin, for the people that they elect. They get it wrong in the support for the conflict. They get it wrong. There was numerous assessments of Russia's military industrial capability, even, shall we say, its ramping up capability before the conflict. How many times have we received information from Western governments or from experts who said that Russia's about to run out of tanks, Russia's about to run out of rations, Russians, running out of missiles, right? Russians are fighting with shovels, right? Yeah. And have no morale. Just continually, these Russian experts are not actual experts. They're ideologues. They're anti-Russian ideologues. And my assessment, my realization that has progressed from, as a young man, right, listening to the first nonsense about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, is that the U.S. media and the presentation of information by, government sources is so wrong all the time, everywhere, and that the majority of it, the majority is propaganda.
Agree.
Yeah. So, agreed. I mean, it's not just Russia; it's China too, and Iran, right? Look at all the nonsense that we were being fed about the Israelis, air defense during the Iranian counterstrikes, right? And how all of that we said had really happened was slowly fessed up to, right? And I'm sure there's far more that hasn't been fessed up to yet. Or, the damage done to
Israel,
economic facilities, the effectiveness of their air defense, right? The number of dead and starving in Gaza, everything is disinformation all the time. And it is a constant struggle. I think that's the primary work of you and me as journalists and analysts, is wading through this filth and trying to find some actual truth in it, right? That's the dirty job that we do. And, it's a tough job. It's not a finding, pearls in that pile of feces is hard, disgusting work. I mean, I don't know about you, but after I listen to or read enough of the Western media, I got to go take a shower because I feel dirty. I mean, I feel physically dirty. So it's not an easy job. That the work that we try.
Most of the time.
But I think by and large, you take a look, at our track record in the alt media in general, right? And I'm not going to speak for some people who have made exaggerated cheerleading claims from the beginning of this conflict. And okay, all right, cheerleaders have their purpose too. That's morale. That's everything. And at least you can say they're on the right side and whatever. But
sometimes
I would argue that a few people who have been very sober assessments from the beginning, and not only me, Brian Berletic is another case example of someone. And there
hi,
are,
by the way. He did say hi.
Yeah. Hi, Brian. Yeah, we talk. So we huddle whenever something big happens.
Oh, do you? You huddle?
Oh yeah, we're on WhatsApp. We're on Telegram. We talk to each other.
Question. And I think these two things are related. And my response to this was like 1,000 LMAOs. So Rubio comes out and says this. I don't think there's any doubt in terms of conventional military capability. The Russians cannot beat the United States or, frankly, many countries in Europe. Oh, really? Oh, really? Okay. And then you get this. Russia threat and why the US moved nuclear bombs to the UK. Okay, so why are you moving nukes to the UK if you're pretty confident that you can beat the Russian military? Oh, you can't see that article. Let me show this article.
See, if Rubio came to Moscow, I would love to take him on a tour of Victory Park, where a rather large number of U.S. military equipment, including Abrams tanks, is on display.
Right. I'm going to ask you, why are they moving nukes to the UK? That is terrifying and fascinating.
Okay, so the U.S. has what they moved back to the UK, because they were actually moved out in 2008. They were there all during the Cold War. They were moved out. Is nuclear gravity bombs, right, that are dropped by bombers, right? And if you were
by the way,
paying
F-35s, I'm sorry to interrupt, they've modified F-35s to be able
F-35s to carry them as well. Yeah, fighter bomber.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So now, if you were paying attention in the last few years, they've actually started a program of updating these gravity bombs, because there have been several hundred of them, something like 250, 300 of them in continental Europe from well back in the Cold War to the present day. Germany, I believe the Netherlands, Italy, right? Turkey, a number of countries in Europe have these there and have been there. Russia is constantly complaining about it. Well, in the last few years, they've been modernizing them, updating their glide kits and other modernizations of these nuclear gravity bombs. So they've been in Europe, right? And Russia has long complained about it. And now they've suddenly been sent back to the UK as well, where they had been pulled out in 2008. Are they particularly useful right now? I mean, obviously, unless the conflict goes nuclear, and I don't know if they're dropping nuclear gravity bombs from bombers. I think we've all got a limited lifespan, a rather short, like say goodbye to your loved ones kind of thing. Because I do not believe that there can be more than one or two tactical nukes used on the battlefield before things are going to start to get bigger than that very quickly. And thank God we haven't seen any of that on either side yet. So, I mean, you can make two arguments with this. One, it's meant as some type of pointless bluster against Russia, some type of deterrent capability. The other one is political reassurance of Europeans, I mean, those are the two arguments you'll be presented. But at the end of the day, I kind of lump it as essentially irrelevant in the same category as Trump talks about giving orders to nuclear boomers to move to certain regions,
right.
As some type of, boys in the high school locker room whipping it out and measuring their status with each other, right? I mean, that's I mean, I wasn't a jock, so I can only talk about what I heard in Hollywood movies and that sort of thing. But if you're a jock and you take offense and say that never happened, I actually believe you. But anyway, it's an analogy, you understand. So I don't. It doesn't bother me that much. I mean, if the nukes are flying, it's all over. I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether there's another 50 gravity bombs in those. I mean, Russia's got Oreshniks. Russia's got Satan. ICBMs. I mean, they've got a whole host of modern long range strategic capabilities, right? And newer ones that they're working on, like underwater nuclear cruise weapon. All kinds of. I'm not particularly worried, and I mean, everything has to be factored into military planning, of course, but I don't. In strategic terms, this is not some big development. And if it was meant to scare the Russians, I think actually it just shows Western insecurity more than anything else.
There's a third, that there's preparation because there is no back down, that they will hit the precipice of escalation. And
I don't think we're there yet.
No, I'm saying they're planning on that. Meaning, as you pointed out, a U.S. president can't accept a surrender document from the Russians. And
yeah,
Russia,
there will. That's why I said. I've long said there will be no diplomatic settlement to this.
Right, and he can't walk away because he doesn't want to look weak by walking away. So you're stuck with continuous escalation in this kind of slow, plodding fashion that the Russians are going to continuously
or
blow off the ultimatum.
At some point, a frozen conflict, right? Which is what happened in Syria, right? There was no agreement on dividing up Syria, right? The U.S. and its Kurdish proxies were in the east, the Turks and their jihadi proxies were in the north, and Russia and the Syrian government and Iran and Hezbollah, were in the majority of the country to the south and the west, right? But there was never an agreement. There was never a treaty. There was never a political reconciliation. There was never any new constitution or new shared government agreed to. Conflict just stopped. That's a frozen conflict.
And the Russians would accept that.
Would the Russians accept that? I mean, they don't want that. Would they have? Will they have to accept that at some point? Sure, almost certainly. The only question is where is that frozen conflict line? That's the question. That is the only thing that's being fought about now. But let's be honest about that. All the fighting that's going on now is about where that contact line is going to end up, right? How much of Ukraine, how much of the Kiev regime is left, right? And Trump, I accept that on a personal level, Trump has nothing but contempt for Zelensky, and on a personal level, probably doesn't care much for Ukraine. And we know he can't stand the European leaders, and they can't stand him. But he's still the U.S. president. He's the leader of U.S.-led Western global hegemony. And at the end of the day, the pressure on him to save a U.S. proxy regime that was installed in Ukraine back in 2014 under the Obama administration, he's got to do something. He's got to, and he's reaching in that quiver, right? For economic tools, for, military supplies to send Kiev regime on the battlefield. And he finds that Biden has already emptied out that quiver. And so he's getting increasingly desperate and panicked and frustrated and bombastic. And he's talking about nuclear submarines that whatever he may say, are not diverting off their assigned patrol paths
No,
as boomers do, or now resending nuclear gravity bombs to the UK.
Look, Mark, how does that work? I mean, like, let me ask you this: do you consider frozen conflict taking all of Ukraine? I guess my issue is this: whatever that line.
At some point, I think it should be necessary. I think it is necessary. And I think at some point, I still don't think the Kremlin wants that. In fact, I'm pretty sure they don't. But at the end of the day, I think that they will have no choice but to do that. Because anything that's left, if there is no political agreement on ending the conflict that gives Russia a guarantee of security and effectively ends the de facto war that is going on between Russia and NATO, unless there's some diplomatic settlement, then any rump Ukraine that is left on the other side of that frozen conflict line just becomes a battlefield in preparation for the next war. And the Europeans, they're giving enough signals. I mean, try to find me a European leader or a European, political leader, a military leader, an intelligence leader who is not saying we will be at war with Russians in 2 years, in 3 years, in 5 years, no later than 2030. They are all saying it, right? And I know the Kremlin imagined at some point that there was going to be some rational moment where the West gives up and, turns back from a conflict that has a very slippery slope to a nuclear conflict, that they would show sanity, that they would show reason, that they would understand that Russia has won, that they provoked this entire thing needlessly, and that some type of new security architecture for Europe were agreed that we're not about to go to war with each other, and presumably a bit more than that. That's not going to happen. And the reality is that was never going to happen. Because the European leaders, the U.S. leaders, right, the blob on both sides of the Atlantic, the deep state, however you want to talk about it, they are not sane, rational, pragmatic, cautious people like they are in the Kremlin. They are ideologically driven by a messianic, supremacist ideology of exceptionalism, whether it's of the American variant or the European Western exceptionalism variant. They believe that they are socially, societally, and structurally superior, and above all, morally superior to every other country, every other state, every other civilization on Earth, and that they have not just the right, but the duty to run the world. And until they are disabused of that most dangerous ideology in the world today, there isn't going to be any peace, right? There will be moments of frozen conflict. There will be moments of Cold War, if you want to call it that. But there will not be peace until they are abused of that notion. And I don't know how they can be abused of that notion, short of drastic economic collapse that would immiserate the majority of the Americans and the European people. That is the only thing that would possibly cause that kind of change in mentality across all of politics and society. Because I studied in the U.S. military, right? Nuclear. I studied in U.S. universities. I studied in British universities. When they study politics, when they study international relations, when they study security studies, they are indoctrinated with this exceptionalist belief. It is in every single thing that is written in the universities, that is taught to the students, that is in the thesis papers, the grad papers. It's in every book that you read. Except for critical theory, which is like a tiny little footnote on international relations, right? Or realists like John Mearsheimer, who have now become voices in the wilderness, right? Right. How do you change that? How do you cause that kind of sweeping change? It talks an enormous societal paradigm shifting event. And I just don't see an end to it, right? It's put it in the same, it is a ideology a lot like jihadism, and you could argue certainly communism in its time, that it is an ideology that can and should be applied to everyone everywhere.
Yeah. I guess I don't see how you get a frozen conflict from that. They have to take it all. I mean, that's
Syria.
kind of
it happened in Syria, right? I mean, it happened in numerous conflicts in the post-Soviet space.
What I mean is, Syria didn't have the distribution of force to take it all. Russia does. And unless, as you pointed out, a deal is made. I mean, because look, you don't think so?
I do, with caveats. And the caveat one is that Ukraine is a very large country. And the military size of the military that will be required to militarily occupy all of Ukraine is enormous.
Yeah.
The cost involved in rebuilding all of Ukraine is enormous. Even assuming that a very large percentage, certainly of Eastern Ukrainians, can be brought on as security, of themselves, then you have to man an entire military frontier with all of NATO that is undergoing a rapid increase all the way from Finland, down to Moldova. And if this conflict does not end without expanding into Moldova, either, maybe not the immediate conflict, but Moldova is another flashpoint that is going to go up, right? They're doing the same thing in Moldova that they've done in Ukraine. Of course, they tried to do it in Georgia, and Georgia escaped it. Armenia, similar things are cooking up. There ain't going to be any peace. I know the Kremlin wanted a secure border with the West. They wanted to come, but it can't be. The West can't accept a loss to Russia on Russia's terms, not even halfway on Russia's terms. They can't accept it.
So that means then that part of Ukraine will be in NATO by definition.
De facto,
right.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, that's not even de facto.
Ukraine is de facto in NATO right now. I mean,
if we are saying, which I agree with you, Ukraine is massive. People, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around how big it is.
Yeah.
And the expenditure, the manpower, the extension, the overextension of Russia in regards to trying to occupy.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Extending Russia. That's the name of the Rand paper.
So at some point, that means that Russia is going to say, okay, this is our line. This is where we stop. And this is where we accept that whatever this is going to fill up with the weapons, manpower, etc. I mean, is there a difference between whatever rump state is left for Ukraine and Poland being part of NATO?
Sure, because a gray zone, a zone that is undefined, is a lot more dangerous, right? Poland is protected by a nuclear shield. It is protected by treaties, right? And so it is I am not afraid that NATO is going to invade or attack Russia directly, at least not in a large open way, right? Not even Kaliningrad, whatever these generals, mouthing off may say. And I'm not afraid that Russia is going to attack NATO because, both sides know what that means. But it is the gray countries, the neutral countries in between, which are now at one time it was Austria and Finland, right? Now it's the countries of the former Soviet Union that Russia, NATO getting any closer is an existential threat, right? Because not only is it territory much closer, but then the entirety of that population and its resources become fodder for the Western war machine against Russia. That's why, shall we say, Ukraine is existential to Russia's security, but the Baltics not so much.
Estonia, the mighty Estonian military.
Right. So, at the beginning of this conflict, I had the position that moving into Western Ukraine would be a fundamental mistake. That occupying the part of Ukraine that definitely does not want Russia, unlike, say, East Ukraine, or at least would be willing to accept it, right? And considering the prevalent Banderite ideology there, that the costs of that occupation, guerrilla war, everything would be, not something Russia wanted. It's like Russia doesn't want Poland. Poland's the last thing on this earth that Russia wants, right? Yeah. You got stuck with Poland in the West. No offense to the Poles, but your government, if you're watching this, you understand, right? But over the course of the last 3 years, and how much the West has obviously escalated and provoked the entirety of this conflict, the insane level of the dominant Banderite anti-Russian ideology and how prevalent it is throughout the institutions of the Kiev regime, how strongly it has become embedded, how it's taught to kids in schools, right? The costs of allowing that to continue, even in Galicia, even in Western Ukraine, are probably higher, right, than occupying that space now would be. Which, again, there's no good option there. There's no pretty victory. As Mearsheimer said, there's only ugly victory, right? There's shades of ugly, right? There's no good end to this for Russia. I mean, victory is victory, but it's a victory that, of course, will only lead to more problems and potentially more war, right? Down the line. It's just about the costs. And I mean, that was the whole purpose. Read the Rand paper, right? Everything is about increasing costs to Russia, overextending them, provoking them here, provoking them there, right? At some point, you just have to give them what they think they want and hope that it's not really what they want. But to me, the ultimate cautionary tale against any type of complacency in all of this is what happened in Syria, where Russia won the war on the battlefield and they lost the peace. There was never any treaty signed. There was this nonsense Ostanoff framework with Erdogan as the viper, that no agreement, no trust should have ever been placed in that cunning beast. Look at Syria's run by Al Qaeda now. Literally. Yeah. I mean, Al-Shara now. He was Al-Julani.
Yeah, he changed his name. He has a new moniker now. Right.
He was the former leader of ISIS and Al Qaeda. That is a uncontrovertible fact. And now he just brought in one of Osama bin Laden's famous advisors as his own presidential advisors. You can see the pictures. I mean, this is an Al-Qaeda. This is a new Islamic State in Syria, and the costs to the Orthodox, the cost, the Christian population of Syria, to the Shia population, to the Alawite population, to the Druze. Eventually, the Kurds are going to suffer it, even if they're temporarily. They know the Americans are about to bug out on them, and they're going to be turned over to the tender mercies of the Wahhabis.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say as well, I don't have any sympathy for you. Sorry, you got what you get. You'll get what you deserved. At the end of that day, for ever believing the Americans or ever serving as their proxies. But that has to be the cautionary tale that victory can be seized, and not even necessarily by military means. Out of that grasp. There can never be any complacency. And another interesting little detail, the West at some level, I don't think Donald Trump necessarily internalizes all of this, but there's enough people in the deep state, in the blob, that understand that we're now in a global war. Right? This is World War III. We're in World War III right now. World War III is going to be a decades-long conflict determining the future global order. and it probably already started. I don't know. You can go back probably to 2008 at the
Bucharest summit.
Well, also the Georgia, the August war, when
right.
Russia went into Georgia, which was right after the Bucharest summit, right?
Yeah.
But Australia just transferred 49 Abrams tanks to the Kiev regime. They were old tank, older. They were going to be retired, right? But they still served part of a strategic reserve, you could say. And of course, the U.S. had to agree to that transfer, right? And there's plenty of people within the Trump administration who believe that China is the real threat, right? That's our biggest priority. Leave Russia to the Europeans. They can take care of that. They can't. That's what Eldridge, Colby, and all of these say. But they're willing to give up 49 tanks in the Pacific theater, right? Why? Because those tanks are hardly useful in the Pacific theater. That's going to put island-hopping, drone, missile, naval, and air forces combat. So that means they are looking at their resources globally now as part of a global conflict paradigm and saying we can't use these resources in this part of this global conflict, but they can serve some purpose over here. So that's what just happened.
Mark Sleboda, International Relations, Security Analyst. Mark, you always have my appreciation, man. You're a damn good analyst. You are one of the best that are out there. You can find him on Boosty, Boosty, and just put in either Mark Sleboda or put in Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda. Mark, you have a fantastic rest of your evening, man. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
You be safe. All right, that is the black pill. And by the way, I agree with him. I think I've said as much, that I think we're already in a global war. It's just undeclared. And you can just see it in the movements that are being made and the escalations that are effectively taking place. That doesn't happen in a time of peace, especially when you add in ideologues who don't see reality for what it is. I could be wrong, but I've said before, racist people don't see the world clearly. And I mean that in the context of being able to say, hey, what are our chances in this particular conflict? Or do we even need to be in this conflict? Or what do we think of ourselves in the context of other people? What are my morals? What are my ethics? Am I more than just a man? Or am I somehow better than other people because of my race or where I originate from? They get it wrong. They get it wrong. There's nothing to indicate moral, ethical, or country superiority. Nothing at all. Let me go to the chat while we have a bit of time. Arcane Eclectic. Jamal, please block the Zionist troll S. Barack or Barack S. I put him in timeout. I didn't block him. I don't like blocking people. I feel some kind of way about it. But yeah, he's talking nonsense. Agreed. Lori Ald. Well, thank you, Lori Ald. I appreciate that. And Lori Ald again. Thank you again. I appreciate that. Look, I've said it before. Like it, share it, subscribe to it. You can support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, membership, all of those things help support this content. These shows are often demonetized, and so you are the ones that help this content keep ticking along. And I thank you for it. I thank all of you for it. All right, we are at the 9:30 mark. I do not have a guest coming after the 9:30 mark. And I'm glad that Mark was able to kind of go as long as he did. I appreciate him for doing so. There's so much stuff that I didn't get the opportunity to get with Mark. This being one, come on, right here. This being one, this is a refinery that has been hit. This is 1,000 kilometers from the border. How the hell would a drone get that far? How does a drone get that far? Now, either it's coming from some other state or it's coming internally into Russia itself. One or the other. Now, of course, this is going to be repaired. Refiner is going to be back up in action. But all things being equal, hitting something that far is a bit, dubious, to put it mildly. The other had to do with the two Brits that were captured, that I didn't get the chance to get with Mark on these two. Solemn looking faces. Very solemn looking faces. Now, the Brits are trying to say that these were quote unquote tourists who were in military uniforms who were caught on a Ukrainian military base. The reality of it is these two gentlemen are Colonel Edward Blake, senior officer in the MI6 Psychological Operations Unit, and Lieutenant Colonel Richard Carroll of the British Defense Department. These are two military officers that were caught in Ukraine and that had went through multiple Ukrainian military bases that just were caught by special forces. And of course, looking very solemn with an unsavory future ahead of them. But buck up, guys. Don't be sad blokes. You sacrificed your life for the British government in a war that they were intimately involved in. So you gave it for your country. You were all that you could be for the British government, working for Ukraine, and will most likely spend the rest of your life in a Russian prison. Congratulations, gentlemen. Congratulations. You made the ultimate sacrifice for Britain. The ultimate sacrifice for Britain. Yes, they're terrorists. They're terrorists. Call them what they are. And Russia's going to treat them as terrorists. The Brits initially were like, hey, man, they're just tourists. They're just tourists. They were just hanging out in Ukraine. That's all. They just moseyed into a military base. That's all. Nothing to see here, folks. And then they were like, hey, can we have them back? Can we have our tourists back? No, you cannot have your quote unquote tourists back. Those tourists are going to go to jail for a very long time. The other one I wanted to hit with Mark is this, which is, again, fascinating to me. Mark talks about gray zones and flashpoints. Azerbaijan, Baron Harkonnen. Russia arrested this guy. He is believed to be part of a criminal gang or head of a criminal gang network in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan has been very dicey on this. They've taken umbrage at many of the arrests that have been taking place. But if you're taking umbrage at Russia arresting crime syndicate participants, people, then what does it mean for your government and the influence of those crime syndicates in your government? Is this really the thing that you're going to complain about if you don't have your government enmeshed with criminal organizations? Shaheen Shikalinsky, I suppose his name is. That is a lot of man. That is a lot of man. Whew. Where's his suspense share? Now that's leverage. That is leverage. That is leverage. That is leverage. That's a lot of man. That's a whole lot of man. Donald Trump, one more thing. And I'm going to end this a bit early today. Donald Trump was talking about, it's so bizarre. After Donald Trump gets into a Twitter beef that he loses with Medvedev, where he claims that he is moving nuclear subs to appropriate locations, and that Russia and India has dead economies, and that he doesn't want to trade with those economies, et cetera, despite the fact that he's trying to get trade deals with Russia. And let's be honest, Russia's taken the lithium mines and some of the other resources that he thought he was going to get from Ukraine. Those are now in Russia's pocket. He comes out and says this. Well, there are two things. One is an announcement that Witkoff is going to waste this time to go back to Ukraine. There's that. The other one was about the sanctions. And then, again, he kind of repeats, they don't really care about my sanctions. So why are you doing them? Because the truth of the matter is the quote unquote deadline that people like me are counting down because I want to see him do it. It's like, do it, do it, do it, do it. It's like kids surrounding this other kid who's about to get in a fight. It's like, do it, do it, do it. I want to see him do it. You've come out and you've decided that you're going to pass secondary sanctions on countries that are making deals or using Russian oil. Okay. That is within your power to do. Do it. I want to see it. I want to see it take place. Oh, I have a morbid curiosity about this. And if that's the case, then why are you sending Witkoff ahead of those sanctions coming to fruition? Russia, do not let him save face. Make him do it. Make him do it. Break him is what I want to see take place. This is Trump. Once again, Air Force One asking him, hey, what happens when Russia blows off your ultimatum that they don't care about? What happens?
Can you give us an update on Steve Witkoff in Russia and what happens on Friday if the deadline comes and Russia has not agreed to a ceasefire?
Well, there'll be sanctions, but they seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions. You know, they're wily characters and they're pretty good at avoiding sanctions. So we'll see what happens. But Steve is focused right now on the border in terms of, we're talking about with Gaza, getting people fed.
No, he's not.
And
no, he's not. He's not. He's not. He's lying. Habitual liars lie. This is a sociopath that is murdering women and children and starving millions of human beings. That's what that sociopath is doing. Do not feed into this nonsense about Witkoff is trying to get people fed. He is not.
he may be going, I think next week, Wednesday or Thursday, may be going to Russia. They would like to see him.
No, they won't. No, they won't. I can guarantee you, it's a flat fact. Nobody in Russia asked to see Witkoff. Nobody at all. Not one person. Nobody.
Yes, that he meet. So we'll see what happens.
What's going to happen is they're going to ignore you in its entirety. You will be, once again, ignored. And when you try to pass secondary sanctions on India, China, two countries, by the way, that you're supposed to be making deals with, that's going to be interesting. Again, I'm super interested. UAE, Saudi Arabia, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It will be super interesting. It will be super interesting. It will be super interesting. So yeah, I am super curious on what takes place on that. And there is a countdown that's taking place to the 10 days. I wish you would have said when they blow off your sanctions or when they blow off what you want, what would you do? Because that is the truth. That is a greater reality of what is going to take place. So Donald Trump knows that they're not changing their military posture. They will keep advancing militarily on the battlefield. And then Trump has no power, no cards to do anything about it. That is the sole bare bones truth of the situation. All right. Mark has destroyed my hypothesis that this was some kind of big arrow move. Fair enough, it hurts, but fair enough. I'm not a military strategist in the sense of watching these guys, so fair enough. That's not horrible, which is why I wanted to hit it off Mark in the video. One last thing that I am fascinated by, that I don't know the full context of this. So this is not me. I just play it. Tucker Carlson went on a rant recently in one of his videos about this idea of denying the divine, denying the supernatural, and that the federal government has a vested interest in denying the supernatural. It is weird. It is very strange, but I will play it. Maybe you guys have an understanding of what he is referring to in this in a way that I don't know the context. But this is Tucker. Why is the federal government so interested in denying the supernatural? I'm serious. I'm not making that up. This is his take.
The main thing they want you to believe is the supernatural is not real. Their main interest is in convincing you that the supernatural is not real. Why has that been so important for 80 years for you to convince me the supernatural is not real? Why do you care if I think the supernatural?
Now, real quick, just an aside. If anything exists that is natural, there's no such thing as supernatural in that case. I understand the language that is used, that we use it in an imprecise way, like vampires, demons, magic, that type of stuff. My point is, if it happens, then by definition, it's natural. You may be unfamiliar with it, but if it happens, it's natural. There is no supernatural. There's only reality. Now, if you were talking about Jesus, I'm going to say it's in your imagination, but let's let him finish. And by the way, again, not an atheist. I just don't buy the premise of religious stuff. Psychic function, maybe. Religious stuff, no. Let me go back to Tucker. Let him make his points. Let him finish his points on denying the infinite, the supernatural.
The main thing they want you to believe is the supernatural is not real. Their main interest is in convincing you that the supernatural is not real. Why has that been so important for 80 years for you to convince me the supernatural is not real? Why do you care if I think the supernatural is real? And then you have to ask motive. Like, it's not a profit motive. Like,
if I believe, just to answer that question for the moment, why do you have a vested interest? Well, society has a vested interest in me believing that the supernatural is not real. If I have delusions that a mystical being is telling me to go and kill 10 people, kill 4 people, man. You don't think society, government has a vested interest and you not believe in that nonsense? We, as a society, have a vested interest in people being grounded in reality to varying degrees. Now, there could be disagreements upon what reality is. That's just kind of life. But like everything else, it's a gradation. It's a gradient. You have this kind of curve. Beyond the curve, it's terrifying. When you get Wahhabis who believes that killing Alawites is somehow godly, and so much so that their God loves it, that they're taking pictures of them murdering people and beating up children. Okay, that's a little disturbing, right? When you get some Israelis who, or even Christian Zionists, who say, Jesus will return when we murder all of these Palestinians and we find a red heifer or a red calf that they're trying to produce, and we build a temple. That's terrifying. That is not just political consequences, that is reality-based consequences when you can justify insane, outlandish stuff. So this argument of why do they care about us, well, all of us care, or have vested interests, and people existing within a certain gradient of reality. That's why. There are certain beliefs and ideas that might be farcical, but are less harmful than others. My mom goes to church and sings songs so mythical, Jesus. Okay, well, that's less harmful, right? I don't really care about that. And you may even come away with certain value sets that go beyond the political space in regards to how you should behave. Again, I don't entirely care about that part. But we all have a vested interest in people being tethered on some level or some gradient to reality. That's just, outside that gradient, it's terrible. Again, let Tucker finish this. I don't know. This argument rubs me the wrong way. I think he's talking about religion. He may be talking about UFOs under those two contexts. Is okay, fair enough. But it's being put out almost as this kind of, let him finish.
Does it make them rich to deny that there's supernatural forces? No. What is that? And I don't know the answer, but the obvious answer is, well, because they sort of know they're working for supernatural forces, actually. But that they take physical form, that they're not just like some ethereal, they're not just shadows floating around, specters, fog, that they're physical. Like they're as real as the arm of your chair. People are subject to the supernatural, so they do things that are not natural. like kill themselves. That's why we're the only species that kills itself. Right? So when you kill yourself, whether slowly or all at once, you're being acted on by forces outside of you, spiritual forces, obviously.
That's nonsense. And by the way, I don't dislike Tucker. I don't. But that's nonsense. If you are being starved to death in Gaza, they killed your family, you're left alone. Is it supernatural for you to want to off yourself? I don't know, it's not. If you have some degenerative disease that you know it's not going to get any better, and you are going to lose one faculty after the next and end up being a vegetable slobbering for applesauce, while you have power in your body left, is it require supernatural beings when you don't see any future for yourself to offer yourself? No, you don't. Like, this argument is outlandish, and I don't know where he's aiming at. Is Tucker referring to Christians? That's my assumption. That's the only thing I can come up with in this that he's referring to. When that Christian church got hit in Gaza, and he's like, oh my God, they're hitting a Christian church. It's like, dude, I mean, have you noticed that they're murdering people en masse and starving babies to death? Okay, I understand your church, fair enough. They're doing worse things than that church. That church is just a place. That's just a building. They're doing worse things to real human beings. I don't know what he's thinking about. The United States has not put pressure on Christians. That's nonsense. I don't know what the supernatural thing is he's referring to. By the way, even when I'm referring to UFOs, I don't refer to them as supernatural. If something happens in the physical world, then it's a real thing. Full stop, period. Just because you're not accustomed to it doesn't make it unnatural. I'm not accustomed to, quantum fluctuations. Doesn't mean it's not real. I'm not accustomed to relativistic forces. Like if I'm going near the speed of light and time slows down from external perspective. Again, I'm not accustomed to it. It's still a real thing. You can see it in your satellites when they have to use relativistic equations in order to deal with things like cell phones or cell phone data and that type of stuff. Because, Earth doesn't gravity well, those things are my point. It's just because you're not accustomed to it doesn't make it unnatural. Whether that's remote viewing, whether that's aliens and UFO stuff, whether that's whatever that is, doesn't make it unnatural. I'm pointing out that what he's using as an excuse, which is just weird. It's like it takes demonic forces or some kind of spiritual force to get people to commit suicide. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Yes, there's some people who it's like, oh my God, my boyfriend broke up with me. My life is never going to be the same. And I'm 16 years old and my life is over with. Okay, yeah, those people are nuts. But that's because they have short-sightedness, right? That's not because the spiritual force is acting upon them and making them off themselves. You have some people with mental illness. It's like kill 4 people, man. Okay, believing in imaginary things, in that case, it's not necessarily the best thing in the world either. I guess I'm pointing out this is a very weird clip from Tucker. And I don't know the entire context that he's getting at. And even when he said these things are real, like this chair is real, and then goes into this idea of this kind of spiritual force and element that's going, it's just strange. It's just very strange. Just very, very strange. Whatever. Fair enough. If somebody have the longer clip to that, let me know. I will be super interested in seeing what Tucker is aiming at and trying to hit on that score. Very sad. Nobody talks about the Orthodox community in Gaza, including the destruction of the world's oldest Christian church. Gary Tate, Tucker talks about it. It's very important to him. Does it matter in the context of everything else that's going on? Them being Christians doesn't make them any more worthy of salvation. Them being Christians or worshiping Jesus doesn't make them any better than the people who are effectively being murdered now. What does it matter? Human beings are being slaughtered. Right? I mean, what am I missing? We have one more. Hung Meow, that is the funniest name in the world. Well, you get Sean Fu regarding economics. I don't know who Sean Fu is. I will have, what is his name? He was fantastic last time he was here. What is his name? Warwick Powell will be on the show on Wednesday. Yes, Warwick Powell will be on the show Wednesday. I have a damn good show for you tomorrow also. We are going to have Carl Shaw first thing in the morning. Is that right? Yes, Carl Shaw is going to be first thing in the morning. Margaret Kimberly is going to be on at 8, and we are going to round the show out with, I'm going to butcher his name, Isan Safanajat. He's going to be on the show. Sarah Bills is not going to be here this week, and I'm sad about it. She's a great guest. There are a few guests that I have that are willing to come on. Constantly Mark, Carl, Sarah is one of them. She's going to be in Iraq. I'm super happy for her. I've never been to Iraq. I had the opportunity to go, and I gave it up for #reasons that I now regret, deeply, deeply regret. But I'm happy for her. And so she is en route. Yeah, she's en route. All right, guys. Oh, there's one more. Wanda USA. Non-Zionist Christians are being exterminated. FYI. Wanda, accept that. Look, I guess my point is, in the context of all of the people that are losing their lives, what does their religion matter? That's what I'm trying to get at. I don't see how one person is more deserving of another in the case of all of these people being starved and murdered and killed. That's all I'm getting at. Like when people come on the show and they would see me talking to Margaret Kimberly, or they would see me talking to, let's say, somebody who's more on an aggressively Black point. And they would say, well, hey, I'm your white brother from so-and-so. And it's like, dude, I don't care about your race. It's just stuff that matter to me. I don't care about your religion. It doesn't matter to me one iota. I don't care if you're Muslim, Christian, Jewish. I don't care. Zionism is different, right? That's a political ideology. Every bit is, for me, is close to Nazism. Okay, well, that's different. That's not their religion. That's not cultural. That's none of that. It's different. I don't care about your religion. I don't care about your color. I don't care about your race. I don't care about your culture. I don't care about any of that stuff. For me, you're a person. If you are acting out, then you're acting out. I don't care about the religion and all of that other stuff. I'll become a point. Whether it's a Christian church, whether it's a mosque, whether it's a random person on the street, I don't want people to get butchered and killed. Full stop. Unless, with this caveat, you're the person who's doing it. I don't care about what happens to Zionists any more than I care about what happens to Nazis. Full stop. Yes, I could be cold-hearted on this stuff. But, from the standpoint of innocent people being murdered and slaughtered, no, that's outrageous. I don't care what their designation is in the sense of religion, race, culture, that type of stuff. They're just people, from my point of view. I would tell you, I've been all around the world. Haven't had the opportunity to go to Russia, haven't had the opportunity to go to Iran. Fair enough. But I have been in other Muslim countries. I have been in other countries that are more Christian. I've been to Armenia. I've been to Georgia. Have I been to Armenia? I've been to Georgia. I don't remember if I've been to Armenia. Either way, besides the point. Asian countries, Europe, all of these places, people are the same everywhere you go. Period. They just are. I've been to Egypt where they were watching porn in a what is those things? Those computer shops. It's like, yeah, they may be Muslim, but that stuff is an overlay to just what they are as human beings, right? Same thing in Christian countries, same thing in European countries. Like, people tend to be very similar wherever you go. It's like, no, they don't have bacon here, but people still chubby. They still eat, right? Other stuff. The jokes, very similar. Temperament, very similar, meaning they're just human beings. I don't want people, regardless of their designation that they define themselves as, to be in these situations of being killed. And I feel some kind of way about the people who are effectively affecting that. So I hope you get my point. That's where I'm coming from with this. That's my point of view, Wendy. Hung Meow, will you discuss Darfur, Africa in the 1990s? Oh, Jesus. Here's the thing, Hung Meow, there needs to be a reason for the discussion. Like, if you've noticed, you have to kind of surf on the currents. For better or for worse, it's just kind of the way it works. It's not a historical channel. We may bring up history in the context of something else, in which case we get reason to divert and have the conversation. But it's hard to do in absolute of anything else going on. I hope you get my point. It's not that there's no there's disinterest. It's just, if something happens in Darfur, then you have the ability to go and talk about Darfur. If something happens in that region that's associated with it, you have the capability of going and discussing it. It's contextual to whatever is happening currently. It's current news. That's kind of the weakness of the channel, that you have to continuously make a video. It's not like you can make a video once a week. That doesn't necessarily work. Even if your video was getting 100,000 views, it doesn't work. You're doing current news. It's consistent, constant, et cetera, et cetera. You get to talk about things that are taking place, not things that are historical just for the fact that they're historical. Jeff Rich, his channel gets the opportunity to do it, and he's damn good at it. But this one is current news. And Jeff is too. He's current also. He treads that line. He gets the opportunity to go back and give historical context in a way that we don't get to give, well, I don't get to give on this channel. But again, it's not disinterest. It's just the type of channel it is. What's next? Arcane Eclectic. That interview with Tucker Carlson is on the Sean Ryan show. Thank you for telling me that. Thank you for telling me that. I am super curious on this context. Because yes, I am joking him a bit. But I'm super curious on the larger context that he is effectively getting it. Thank you, Arcane. Wandy, one supports the owners, the other doesn't. I don't understand what you mean by that one, Wandy. One support the owners, the other doesn't. Yeah, I don't know what you mean by that, Wandy. One support the owners, the other just doesn't. Let's go back and look at the original tweet for reference. No non-Zionist Christians are being exterminated. FYI. Yeah, but see, I never assumed that just because they were Christian, they were Zionists, if that makes sense. I mean, my assumption is that if you're in Gaza, you're starving. That Israeli who's captured is also starving. Mind you, if he was fed, he would be on the other side doing the starvation. So my point of view is kind of fuck that guy. But from the standpoint of the people who are effectively there, who are innocent people, babies, women, children, do I really care if that baby is a Christian? Do I really care if that baby is a Muslim? No, I don't. It shouldn't be happening to them because they're human beings. So, all right. We have come to the end. We even made it to 10 o'clock. Look at that. All right. If I can get to the bottom. You don't need religion to be conscious to reality. Then you're just an element. What? You don't need religion to be conscious to reality. Then you're just an element. I don't know what that means. Deuteronomy 28, 16, 17 is called karma. That's wusa. USA or Woo USA Gaddafi. Yes, share everything and Big Brother knows everything. You Christians don't care about privacy. Well, I mean, I don't know if that's the case. Again, they're just people. people care in general about stuff. Just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you don't care about privacy. Oh, geez, look at that. In terms of crime and safety, Gaza or was more like Japan, the United States, more lenient justice system than the United States. Sensible streamer. I'll take your word for it. I don't know that. But okay. We're all just carbon. I think we're more than that. I think we're more than that. I think there's more to it. I mean, look, I don't know as a flat fact if your thoughts are purely in your mind as opposed to some kind of field. I don't know as a flat fact if, like, we take things on assumptions. That's all. Take things on assumptions. Humans are just another group of animals. Agreed. Yeah, for the most part, agreed. Yeah. I mean, like I told you, I'm not an atheist. I just don't believe in this. I don't know. Like, there's enough research to get across that there's something. I just don't buy this structured, angels dancing on the head of a pin, a brutal, vindictive God that is an egomaniac that demands worship. You must worship me or I'm going to send you to the pit of hell. This notion that God knows everything, so he knows whether you're going to bust hell wide open from the very inception, and yet he still allows just souls to be tortured. Like, that stuff doesn't make sense. It's so contradictory. It's nonsensical. But something, yeah, I'm open to something. Just don't know what it is. All right. I am going to end this. I want to thank all of you. I'm going to say like, share, subscribe. You can support this through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, Buy Me a Coffee, memberships. All of these things help support the channel. I want to thank all of you that donated to support the channel. I want to thank all of you who gives likes, shares, all of those things. You guys make this channel what it is. You have my infinite radical thanks. You be safe. And I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one, guys. What does it? Be safe. Oh, be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Got to put caveats around that. Have a good one, all.